A 10-year-old girl stumbles through waist-deep snow, wolves circling closer with each ragged breath she takes. Her stepmother's wagon disappears over the frozen ridge, leaving her to die alone in the Montana wilderness. This is the story of Clara Whitmore, the child nobody wanted who survived the impossible and changed an entire frontier town forever. Stay with me until the very end of this story, and don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back to the winter of 1871, where survival meant more than just staying alive. The wagon lurched to a sudden stop. Clara's fingers went numb against the splintered wooden slat she'd been gripping for the past 6 hours. Through the gaps in the canvas cover, she could see nothing but white. Endless, suffocating white that stretched across the Montana territory like a burial shroud. "Get out!" Lenora's voice cut through the howling wind, flat and final. Not angry, not even cruel in the way Clara had learned to recognize over the past year, just empty. Clara didn't move. Her body had learned to go still when danger came too close, the same way rabbits froze when hawks passed overhead. She pressed herself against the flour sacks, making herself smaller, hoping her stepmother would forget she existed. "I said, get out, girl." This time the words came with movement. The canvas ripped open, and Lenora's gloved hand clamped around Clara's wrist like an iron trap. The cold hit immediately, not the kind that made you shiver, but the kind that stopped your breath mid-chest and turned your lungs to stone. Clara's boots hit the snow and sank past her knees. "Wait!" The word came out broken, barely a whisper. "Please, I'll be better. I won't complain about the cold anymore. I'll..." "Shut your mouth." Lenora threw a cloth bundle into the snow beside Clara. It landed with a muffled thump, and Clara knew without looking that it contained the stale bread ends from 3 days ago, and maybe, if she was lucky, the canteen that had frozen solid during last night's camp. "My father," Clara started, then stopped. Invoking her father's name hadn't worked in months. Thomas Whitmore had been dead since August, his body left in an unmarked grave somewhere in Nebraska when the fever finally took him. Lenora had cried for exactly 1 day. Then she'd packed up their wagon and kept moving west like nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. "Your father," Lenora said, and for the first time her voice carried something other than emptiness. It carried contempt. "Was a weak fool who left me with nothing but debts and a useless child I never wanted." The wind screamed between them. Clara's teeth started chattering so hard she bit her tongue, tasted copper. "You can't just leave me here." Clara hated how small her voice sounded, how much it shook. She tried again, forcing the words out louder. "You'll hang for this. Someone will find out. Someone will..." "Who?" Lenora stepped closer, and Clara saw her stepmother's face clearly for the first time in weeks. The woman looked 20 years older than she had when they'd left Ohio. Her skin stretched tight across her bones, her lips cracked and bleeding from the cold. But her eyes were sharp and clear, and completely, utterly certain. "Who's going to find out, Clara? Your father's family, dead or scattered? Mine? They don't even know you exist. We're 300 miles from the nearest town that gives a damn about anyone, and winter's got this whole territory locked down tight until spring." She pulled her shawl tighter, already turning back toward the wagon. "You're not my blood. You're not my responsibility. And I'm done pretending otherwise." "But I'm 10 years old." The words ripped out of Clara's throat in a scream that hurt, that took everything she had left. "I'm 10 years old, and you're going to leave me in the snow to die." Lenora paused with one hand on the wagon seat. For a moment, just one moment, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or just annoyance at having to hear the truth said out loud. "Then I suggest," she said quietly, "you figure out how to survive anyway." The wagon started moving. Clara lunged forward, her legs fighting through snow that grabbed and pulled and tried to drag her down. "Wait, please. I won't eat much. I can walk behind the wagon. You don't have to feed me. I'll just..." Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow. A root, a rock, it didn't matter. And she went down hard, face first into the white. Ice filled her mouth, her nose, burning cold that made her gag and choke. By the time she struggled back to her knees, spitting and gasping, the wagon was already 50 yards away. "Please!" The word echoed off the mountains and came back to her empty. The wagon didn't stop, didn't even slow down. Clara knelt in the snow and watched the only familiar thing in this frozen hell disappear over a ridge, taking with it every scrap of warmth and safety she had left in the world. Then she was alone. Completely, impossibly alone. The first thing that hit her wasn't fear, it was the silence. Claire had spent the last 8 months surrounded by constant noise, wagon wheels creaking, horses snorting, Lenora's sharp voice giving orders, other travelers calling out greetings or warnings as wagon trains crossed paths. Even at night there had been sounds, canvas flapping in wind, fire crackling, someone always coughing or snoring or crying quietly when they thought nobody could hear. Now there was nothing, just wind, just the soft hiss of fresh snow falling, just her own breathing, too fast, too loud, panicked. Get up. Claire's hands were already numb. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. But she grabbed the cloth bundle Lenore had thrown, clutched it against her chest, and forced herself to stand. The snow came up to her thighs. Each step forward took everything she had. Lift one leg, drag it through the resistance, plant it down, shift weight, repeat. Her wool dress, threadbare after months on the trail, patched in 6 places with whatever fabric Lenora could spare, soaked through immediately. Ice formed in her hair, on her eyelashes, in the folds of her coat that had been her father's once, cut down to fit a girl's shoulders. She made it 20 steps before she had to stop, gasping. The ridge where Lenora's wagon had disappeared was already invisible. The falling snow erased everything, tracks, landmarks, the trail itself. Clara turned in a slow circle, looking for anything that might tell her which direction to go. Nothing. Just white. Just cold. Just death coming slow and patient and absolutely certain. Her father's voice came to her then, crystal clear despite being months dead. If you're ever lost, Clara girl, find water. Follow water downstream. All settlements get built near water eventually. Water. Clara's eyes burned with tears that froze on her cheeks before they could fall. She unwrapped the cloth bundle with fingers that barely worked anymore. 2 chunks of bread, hard as stones. The canteen, frozen exactly like she'd expected, useless. She bit into the bread anyway. It hurt her teeth, barely softened even when she held it in her mouth and let her spit work on it. But it was something, calories, energy, fuel to keep moving. She ate half of one piece, forced herself to save the rest, then picked a direction that felt like downhill and started walking. Time stopped meaning anything. Clara walked until her legs gave out, rested until the cold became dangerous. Walked again. The snow never stopped falling. The wind never stopped cutting through her clothes like knives. And the light, what little light filtered through the storm clouds, started dying. Sunset was coming. The thought made something animal and terrified wake up in Clara's chest. She'd heard the men on the wagon trail talk about Montana nights in winter, about how the temperature dropped 40 degrees after dark, about the wolves that came down from the high country when game got scarce, about travelers found frozen solid in their bedrolls, dead before morning despite their fires and their shelters and their preparations. She had none of those things, just her father's coat, just frozen bread, just the fading light. Please, Clara whispered to nobody, to nothing, to the vast, indifferent wilderness that surrounded her on all sides. Please, somebody help me. The wind howled in response. She kept walking. Full darkness came like a curtain dropping. One moment Clara could still make out the shapes of pine trees, the darker shadows of rocks, the slight variations in the snow that might indicate safe ground versus hidden ravines. The next moment, nothing. Blackness so complete it made her dizzy. She stopped walking because continuing meant stepping blind into oblivion. Her breath came out in clouds she couldn't see, and the cold was something alive now, something with teeth, something that wanted inside her skin. She was going to die here. The knowledge settled over her with strange clarity. No drama, no last-minute hope. Just simple fact. A 10-year-old girl alone in the Montana wilderness in winter would not survive the night. Clara sank down into the snow. Her legs folded beneath her, grateful to stop fighting. The cold felt almost warm now, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a very bad sign. She thought about her father, about the way he used to lift her onto his shoulders during harvest festivals back in Ohio, spinning until she shrieked with laughter. About his rough carpenter's hands braiding her hair each morning after her mother died, getting it wrong half the time but trying so hard. About the fever dreams at the end, when he'd called out for his first wife, for his parents, for anyone but the daughter who sat beside him wiping his forehead with wet cloth. Had he known what would happen to Clara after he died? Had he understood what kind of woman Lenora was beneath the grieving widow performance she'd put on? Or had he just been desperate not to leave his daughter alone, willing to believe any lie that meant she'd be taken care of? It didn't matter now. Clara closed her eyes. The cold stopped hurting quite so much. Her breathing slowed. Somewhere very far away she heard a sound that might have been wind or might have been something else, something with a voice, howling. Her eyes snapped open. There, through the darkness and the blowing snow, yellow eyes, not one pair, not two, 6, maybe more. Wolves. Terror dumped into Clara's blood like ice water, shocking her system back to desperate, clawing life. She scrambled backward, her hands sinking into snow, her legs barely responding to commands. The yellow eyes moved closer, slow, patient, spread out in a semicircle that meant these weren't random predators. They were hunting, working together, cutting off escape routes. A sound came out of Clara's throat, something between a scream and a sob. The lead wolf stepped close enough that she could make out its shape against the snow. Massive, shaggy, with shoulders that stood at least 3 feet high. It growled, low and rumbling, and the sound went straight through Clara's chest like a physical thing. She tried to stand, made it to her knees. Her body shook so hard she couldn't tell anymore if it was from cold or fear or both. The bread bundle had fallen somewhere in the snow. Not that it mattered. Not that anything mattered except the fact that she was about to be torn apart by animals while still alive enough to feel it. The wolf lunged. Clara threw her arms up over her face, screaming. The gunshot cracked across the night like the world splitting open. The wolf yelped and veered sideways, its momentum carrying it past Clara by inches. She felt the wind of its passage, smelled the wet dog stink of its fur. More gunshots followed, one after another, methodical and calm. The wolves scattered, their shapes disappearing into the darkness, their howls fading into the wind. Then silence. Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except kneel in the snow and shake and wait for her heart to remember how to beat properly. Hoofbeats approached. Heavy. Steady. A horse materialized out of the darkness, huge, dark, breathing clouds of steam into the frozen air. And on top of it, a man. He sat in the saddle like he'd been born there, rifle still in one hand, reins in the other. Clara couldn't make out his face in the darkness, just the outline of his hat, the broad shape of his shoulders. For a long moment he just looked at her, saying nothing, doing nothing. Then he spoke, and his voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "What the hell are you doing out here, kid?" Clara's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Her brain tried to form words, tried to explain about Lenora, about the wagon, about being left to die, but everything tangled up in her throat and stuck there. The man muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse. He dismounted, his boots hitting the snow with solid thuds, and Clara got her first real look at him. Tall? Maybe 40 years old, maybe older. Hard to tell with the beard and the weathered skin. He wore a heavy coat that had seen years of use, gloves that had been repaired multiple times, and a hat that kept his eyes in shadow. He knelt in front of Clara, close enough that she could see his breath, far enough that she didn't feel trapped. "I'm going to ask you some questions," he said slowly. "Think you can answer them?" Clara managed a tiny nod. "You got people? Parents? Anyone looking for you?" She shook her head. The movement made tears spill over, hot against her frozen cheeks. "You hurt? Bit by the wolves?" Another head shake. "How long you been out here?" Clara's voice came back as a croak. Since morning." The man's jaw tightened. "Since morning. Jesus Christ." He looked around at the darkness, at the falling snow, at the empty wilderness. When he looked back at Clara, something in his expression had changed. Still hard, still rough. But underneath, anger. Not at her. For her. "Someone left you out here on purpose." It wasn't a question, but Clara nodded anyway. The man stood. For a horrible second, Clara thought he was going to leave her too, going to decide she wasn't worth the trouble, Wasn't worth the risk of whatever danger came with helping an abandoned child in the middle of nowhere. Instead, he pulled off his own coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It swallowed her whole, heavy with his warmth, smelling like leather and horses and wood smoke. "Can you ride?" I think so." "Good enough." He lifted her like she weighed nothing, setting her in the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arms came around both sides, holding the reins, making a cage of warmth and safety that Clara's brain couldn't quite process as real. "Name's Wade Holloway," he said. "I run a cattle ranch about 2 hours from here. You're going to stay there until we figure out what to do with you. Understand?" Clara nodded against his chest. "What's your name, kid?" "Clara." Her voice was so small. "Clara Whitmore." "Well, Clara Whitmore." Wade turned his horse, pointing it into the darkness with the confidence of someone who knew this land like breathing. "Let's get you somewhere warm before we both freeze to death." The horse started moving, and Clara felt something break open in her chest, relief so intense it hurt worse than the cold ever had. She started crying, really crying, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body and made her nose run and left her gasping. Wade didn't tell her to stop, didn't tell her to be brave, just kept riding, one arm steady around her middle, keeping her secure. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "I got you." And for the first time in 8 months, since her father died and left her in the hands of a woman who saw her as nothing but a burden, Clara believed that someone might actually mean those words. Iron Ridge Ranch appeared out of the storm like a miracle. Clara saw the lights first, warm yellow squares of lamplight glowing through windows. Then the shapes of buildings started to resolve. A massive barn, several smaller outbuildings, corrals with dark shapes of cattle huddled together, and finally, the main house itself. 2 stories. Solid wood construction, smoke rising from 3 different chimneys. It looked like something from before the trail, before the sickness, before everything fell apart. Wade's horse knew the way home without guidance, carrying them straight to the house. The front door flew open before they'd even dismounted, and a woman rushed out onto the porch. "Wade Holloway, where have you been? I was about to send the men out looking, and—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes landing on Clara. "Sweet Mary, what do you have there?" "Found her about 10 miles east." Wade slid off the horse and reached up to lift Clara down. Her legs almost gave out when her feet hit ground, but his hand stayed steady on her shoulders. Wolves were circling. She's half frozen and starving. The woman, short, round, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes that missed absolutely nothing, came down the porch steps despite the snow. She took one look at Clara, and her face transformed from surprise to fury to something soft and fierce all at once. "Inside, now, both of you!" She grabbed Clara's hand, and her touch was warm, alive, gentle, in a way Clara had almost forgotten hands could be. "Wade, get Thomas to see to your horse. I'm taking this child straight to the kitchen." "Elena, don't you Elena me. Look at her. She's shaking so hard her teeth are rattling. How long was she out there?" "Since morning," she says. Elena's expression went dangerous. Someone's going to answer for this. She pulled Clara into the house, and the warmth hit like a physical wall. Clara's skin burned where the cold had numbed it. Her eyes watered. Her lungs expanded properly for the first time in hours. The kitchen was enormous, all wood and iron with a massive stove throwing heat, pots hanging from hooks, dried herbs in bundles, and a table that could seat a dozen people easily. Elena sat Clara down in a chair close to the stove and immediately started unlacing her frozen boots. "What's your name, honey?" "Clara." "Clara. That's a good, strong name." Elena got the boots off and made a disapproving sound at the state of Clara's stockings, soaked through, half frozen, with holes in 3 places. "And who left you in the snow, Clara? Who do I need to go have words with?" The question was casual, but Clara heard the steel underneath. She glanced at Wade, who'd followed them inside and now stood by the doorway watching everything with an unreadable expression. "My stepmother," Clara whispered. "Lenora Voss, she said I wasn't her blood, that she was done taking care of me." "Done taking care of—" Elena stopped herself, visibly swallowing whatever words wanted to come out. Instead, she just worked on getting Clara's wet stockings off, replacing them with thick wool socks that had been hanging near the stove. "How old are you?" 10. 10 years old. Elena's hand stilled for a moment. And your father? Where's he? Dead. Fever took him in Nebraska. Wade shifted his weight against the doorframe. When Clara looked at him, his jaw was tight, his eyes hard. Elena stood and started pulling things from cupboards: bread, cheese, dried meat, a jar of something that might have been preserves. When's the last time you ate? This morning. A piece of bread. Before that? Clara had to think. 2 days ago? Maybe 3? Lenora said I ate too much, that I needed to learn to go without. The jar Elena was holding slipped. She caught it before it hit the counter, but just barely. When she turned back to Clara, her eyes were shining with tears that she absolutely refused to let fall. You're going to eat now, she said firmly, and then you're going to have a hot bath, and then you're going to sleep in a real bed with clean sheets and all the blankets you want. And tomorrow we're going to figure out the rest. Does that sound all right? Clara nodded. She tried to say thank you, tried to find words big enough for what these strangers were doing, but her throat closed up again. Elena seemed to understand anyway. She squeezed Clara's shoulder, gentle, careful, like Clara might break, then started assembling food on a plate. Thick slices of bread, real butter, not the watery substitute Lenora had rationed out. Cheese that actually tasted like something. Dried venison that melted in Clara's mouth. Clara ate slowly at first, afraid of being yelled at for taking too much. But Elena kept putting more food on her plate, kept refilling her cup with warm milk sweetened with honey, kept saying, "That's it, take your time, there's plenty more." By the third helping, Clara started to believe her. Wade hadn't moved from the doorway. He watched Clara eat like he was trying to solve a puzzle, his expression difficult to read. Finally, he spoke. The stepmother. She traveling alone? Clara swallowed a mouthful of bread. No, she's meeting someone in Silver Creek, a man named Victor something. They're supposed to get married. Victor Hale? The name came from Elena, sharp with recognition. Clara nodded. Wade and Elena exchanged a look that contained entire conversations Clara couldn't interpret. That's trouble, Elena said quietly. I know. He's not going to let this go. When he finds out you brought her here, let him try. Wade's voice went flat and dangerous. The woman left a 10-year-old child to freeze to death in a blizzard. I don't give a damn who she's marrying or what connections he has. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying this is going to get complicated. Everything gets complicated. Wade finally moved, pushing off the doorframe and heading for the interior door. I'm going to check the stock, make sure she's settled for the night. He left without another word, and Clara was struck by how much space he seemed to take up, even when he wasn't there. The whole room felt different without him in it. Elena noticed her staring. Wade's a good man, she said gently. Doesn't always show it in ways people expect. But he's good. Why did he help me? The question came out before Clara could stop it. She'd been turning it over in her mind since the moment Wade had wrapped his coat around her shoulders. He didn't know her, had no reason to care whether she lived or died, could have ridden right past in the darkness and nobody would have blamed him. But he hadn't. Elena sat down across from Clara, her work-worn hands folded on the table. 7 years ago, Wade lost his wife and his daughter in childbirth. Both of them, same night. His little girl, Sarah, she would have been about your age now if she'd lived. Clara's chest went tight. He hasn't been the same since. Keeps to himself. Runs this ranch like it's the only thing keeping him alive, because maybe it is. Elena's eyes found Clara's. But when I saw him carry you in tonight, that's the first time in years I've seen him look like he remembers what it means to protect something. A door slammed somewhere deeper in the house. Voices called out, men coming in from the evening work, stomping snow off their boots, arguing good-naturedly about something Clara couldn't make out. Come on, Elena said, standing. Let's get you cleaned up before the whole crew descends on this kitchen demanding supper. They're good men, all of them, but they're also loud and rough around the edges, and you don't need that tonight. She led Clara upstairs to a small room that overlooked the front of the property. Simple, clean, with a real bed that had a quilt folded at the foot and curtains on the window. This was Sarah's room, Elena said quietly. Wade hasn't let anyone use it since, but I think... She paused, choosing her words. I think maybe it's time. Clara stood in the doorway, afraid to step inside. Are you sure? I don't want to... You're not disrupting anything, honey. If anything, you're giving this room a chance to be what it was meant for again. Elena moved inside, lighting the lamp on the bedside table. Now, let's get some warm water and clean clothes, and then you're going straight to sleep. Clara had forgotten what it felt like to be clean. The hot water Elena brought up in a copper tub, carried by two ranch hands who didn't ask questions but couldn't quite hide their curiosity, turned gray within minutes from the trail dirt, the old sweat, the residue of fear that seemed to have soaked into Clara's skin. Elena helped her wash her hair, gentle with the tangles, not pulling even when the knots were bad. She produced a nightgown, too big, obviously meant for someone older, and wrapped Clara in it like armor. By the time Clara climbed into bed, she was so tired her bones ached, but her stomach was full. Her body was warm. The sheets smelled like lavender and sunshine. Elena pulled the quilt up to Clara's chin. You sleep as long as you need. If you wake up and need anything, my room's just down the hall. Wade's room is on the ground floor near the kitchen. Don't be afraid to call out. Elena? Yes, honey? Clara's voice came out very small. Am I going to have to go back? To Lenora? The question had been building all night. The fear that this, all of this, the warmth and the food and the kindness, was temporary. That tomorrow Lenora would show up and demand her property back and drag Clara away to finish dying somewhere these people couldn't interfere. Elena sat on the edge of the bed. In the lamplight, her face looked tired but fierce. I can't make you promises about things I don't control, she said honestly, but I can promise that Wade won't let anyone take you without a fight, and neither will I. You understand? Clara nodded. Good. Now sleep. Tomorrow's going to come whether you're ready or not. She kissed Clara's forehead, a gesture so motherly, so normal, so completely unexpected that Clara's eyes burned with fresh tears, and then left, taking the lamp but leaving the door cracked open so light from the hallway spilled through. Clara lay in the darkness and listened to the house settle around her. Footsteps on stairs, voices murmuring, a door closing, the wind outside howling against walls that held firm. For the first time in 8 months, she felt something like safety. It wouldn't last. She knew that. Life had taught her too well that good things always ended, that people always left, that hope was just fear wearing a prettier mask. But for tonight, just for tonight, Clara let herself believe that maybe, possibly, the worst was over. She closed her eyes and fell asleep in a dead girl's bed, wearing a dead girl's nightgown, in a house owned by a man who'd lost everything he loved. Outside, the Montana winter howled on, and somewhere out there heading toward Silver Creek with lies ready on her tongue, Lenora Voss had no idea that the child she'd left to die was still breathing. That mistake, that one moment of miscalculation would change everything, but that reckoning was still weeks away. For now, there was just a 10-year-old girl sleeping safe for the first time since her father died. And that, Clara would learn, was where all impossible things began. Not with grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but with one person deciding another person's life was worth fighting for, even when the world said otherwise. Especially then. Clara woke to voices arguing somewhere below her window. For a confused moment, she thought she was back in the wagon, that Lenora was bartering with another traveler over supplies, that any second now she'd be called down to haul water or tend the fire or do whatever task would earn her the privilege of eating that day. Then she opened her eyes and saw the wooden ceiling beams, the quilt, the morning light streaming through actual glass windows, and remembered. Iron Ridge Ranch, Wade Holloway, Elena, safety. The voices got louder. Don't care what you think, Thomas. The girl stays. That was Wade, his tone leaving no room for argument. I'm not saying throw her out in the snow. A different voice, older, rougher. I'm saying you're opening a door you might not be able to close. Woman like that, traveling with Victor Hale, they're going to come looking, and when they do, let them. Wade, be reasonable. You bring in some random kid, no papers, no proof of who she is or what happened to her. I know what happened to her. She told me. Her stepmother left her to die. That's what she says. The words hit Clara like a slap. She sat up in bed, the quilt falling away, cold air hitting her skin. You calling her a liar? Wade's voice dropped to something dangerous. I'm saying she's 10 years old and scared and maybe not remembering things exactly how they happened. Kids get confused, get separated from their people in panic, and there were wolf tracks all around where I found her, Thomas. 6 different animals. Another 10 minutes, and there wouldn't have been enough left of her to bury. Silence. Then footsteps on gravel, pacing. Look, Thomas said finally. I've worked for you 7 years. Watched you build this place from nothing. And I'm telling you, as someone who gives a damn, this is going to bring trouble you're not prepared for. I've handled trouble before. Not like this. Victor Hale's got connections in Silver Creek. Hell, half the territory. He wants that girl back. He'll find a way to make it legal whether it's right or not. Then I'll find a way to make it more legal to keep her here. More silence. Clara crept out of bed and moved to the window, careful to stay behind the curtain. Below, she could see Wade standing in the yard with an older man, 60 at least, with a beard gone completely white and a face weathered to leather. Thomas, apparently. You really want to go to war over a kid you just met? Thomas asked. Wade turned to face him fully. I watched my daughter die, Thomas. Watched her take exactly 3 breaths before her lungs gave out. And I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it cracked. I'm not watching another child die when I can actually do something about it. Thomas looked at Wade for a long moment. Then he sighed, the fight going out of him. All right, but when this blows up, and it will blow up, don't say I didn't warn you. Noted. Thomas walked off toward the barn, shaking his head. Wade stood alone in the yard, his breath making clouds in the morning air, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. Clara pulled back from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. The nightgown was too big. The room was too nice. And the man downstairs was fighting with his own people to protect a girl he'd known for less than 12 hours. It didn't make sense. Nothing good ever came without a price. Lenore had taught her that. Her father's kindness had died with him, leaving her alone. Every adult who'd ever promised to take care of her had either left or hurt her, or both. So why would Wade Holloway be different? A knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Clara? Elena's voice gentle. You awake, honey? Yes. The door opened and Elena came in carrying a tray with food, eggs, biscuits, jam, and a cup of something that smelled like coffee but sweeter. She set it on the small table by the window and gave Clara a smile that had worry tucked into its corners. Heard the commotion? Clara nodded. Thomas means well. He just... Elena sat down in the chair, gesturing for Clara to eat. He's protective of Wade. Watched him go through hell after Sarah and Rebecca died. He doesn't want to see Wade get hurt again. Rebecca was Wade's wife? Yes. She died bringing Sarah into the world. And Sarah... Elena's voice caught. Sarah fought for 3 hours. Wade held her the whole time, talked to her, begged her to stay. But babies that small, when their lungs don't work right, there's nothing anyone can do. Clara picked up a biscuit but didn't eat it. I don't want to cause problems. You're not causing anything. The problem was already there the moment your stepmother decided your life didn't matter. Elena leaned forward. Listen to me, Clara. What happened yesterday? What's going to keep happening? Isn't your fault. You understand? But Thomas said, Thomas is worried about legal trouble and territory politics and all the complicated adult nonsense that comes with taking in a child who's got people looking for her. That's not the same as you being a problem. Elena's expression went fierce. You're a little girl who needs help, that's all. Anyone who makes it more complicated than that is the one with the problem, not you. Clara wanted to believe her. Wanted it so badly her chest ached. Eat, Elena said gently. We've got a full day ahead. The eggs were still warm, cooked with butter and salt and care. The biscuits melted in Clara's mouth, and the sweet coffee, which Elena explained was mostly milk with just enough coffee to make it interesting, tasted like something from another life entirely. While Clara ate, Elena opened the wardrobe that stood against the far wall. Inside hung dresses Clara hadn't noticed last night. Small dresses. A girl's dresses. These were Sarah's, Elena said quietly. Wade kept them all. Couldn't bring himself to give them away or burn them or do anything that felt like erasing her. She pulled out a simple brown dress with long sleeves and a white collar. But I hope he'd want them used. Want them to keep doing what they were meant for. Clara set down her cup. Are you sure? No. But I'm going to choose to believe it anyway. Elena laid the dress on the bed. Get changed, then come downstairs. There's people you should meet. She left before Clara could protest. The dress fit almost perfectly. A little long in the sleeves, a little loose in the waist, but nothing that mattered. Clara braided her own hair, clumsy, uneven, but good enough, and made her way downstairs on legs that still felt unsteady. The kitchen was full of men. They sat around the big table or leaned against counters, all of them holding tin cups of coffee, all of them going quiet the moment Clara appeared in the doorway. Wade stood near the stove, talking to a young man with dark hair and a scar across his jaw. He noticed Clara and nodded once. "Come here." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't mean either. Just Wade. Clara walked over, acutely aware of every pair of eyes tracking her movement. "This is Clara," Wade said to the room at large. "She's staying here. Anyone's got a problem with that? Take it up with me directly. Understood?" A chorus of nods and muttered agreements. "Good. Clara, these are the hands that keep this place running." He pointed to each man in turn. "That's Thomas. You heard us this morning, I'd guess. He's my foreman. Been here since before the ranch had a name." Thomas raised his cup in acknowledgement but didn't smile. "Miguel's our best horse breaker. Don't let him talk you into learning to ride anything he's currently working with." Miguel, the young man with the scar, grinned. "I only put people on the gentle ones." Your definition of gentle would terrify most cavalry officers. Wade moved on. "James and Cooper are brothers, handle most of the cattle work. Robert manages the barn. And that's Frank, who pretends to be our cook but mostly just burns everything and blames the stove." "The stove's got a vendetta," Frank protested. He was older than the others, with gray in his beard and laugh lines around his eyes. "I'm innocent." "You're incompetent." "That too." The men chuckled, and some of the tension in the room eased. Clara felt herself relax slightly. These weren't Lenore's people, sharp-edged and quick to anger. They were rough, sure, loud, but not cruel. "Clara's going to be helping Elena around the house," Wade continued, "learning how things work here. Anyone gives her trouble, you answer to me. Anyone outside this ranch gives her trouble, you also answer to me. Clear?" More nods. "All right. Get back to work. Miguel, check the fence line in the north pasture. Thomas, we need to talk about feed supplies. The rest of you know your jobs." The kitchen emptied quickly, men filing out with the efficiency of people who'd done this dance 1,000 times. Within minutes, it was just Wade, Elena, and Clara again. Elena started cleaning up the breakfast dishes. "That went better than I expected." "They're good men," Wade said. "They'll fall in line." "It's not them I'm worried about." Elena's hand stilled in the wash water. "How long do you think before word reaches Silver Creek?" "Couple weeks, maybe. Depends on the weather and how much traveling people are willing to do." "And then?" Wade looked at Clara, really looked at her, like he was trying to see past the surface to whatever truth lived underneath. "Then we deal with it." He left through the back door and Clara watched him go, still trying to understand what she'd gotten herself into. Elena dried her hands on her apron. "Come on, I'll show you around. Might as well learn where everything is if you're going to be living here." Living here. The word still felt impossible. The house was bigger than it looked from outside. The main floor had the kitchen, a dining room that could seat 20, Wade's bedroom tucked into a corner near the back, and a sitting room with a fireplace and shelves full of books. Upstairs were 4 more bedrooms. Sarah's room where Clara had slept, Elena's room, and 2 others currently used for storage. "We built this place to hold a family," Elena explained as they toured. "Wade and Rebecca had plans, lots of children, a full house. Then everything fell apart, and it's just been him and me and whoever's working the ranch ever since." "How long have you been here?" 5 years. Came out from St. Louis after my husband died. Needed work. Needed a fresh start. Wade needed someone to manage the house who wouldn't ask too many questions about why a man his age was living alone in the middle of nowhere. Elena smiled. "Worked out for both of us." They ended up in the sitting room and Elena pulled a book from one of the shelves. "Can you read?" "Yes. My mother taught me before she died, and my father kept it up after." "Good. Then you won't be completely bored while I'm working." Elena handed her the book, something called David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. "We'll figure out proper schooling eventually, but for now, keep your mind sharp however you can." Clara took the book carefully, like it might disappear if she held it wrong. "Elena, why is Wade really doing this?" Elena sat down in one of the chairs near the fireplace. "You heard about Sarah. You said she died. that Wade held her. What I didn't tell you is what it did to him after. Elena stared into the unlit fireplace. He barely spoke for a year, ran this ranch like a machine, efficient, cold, got the work done, but there was nothing behind it except the need to stay busy. I thought he'd never come back from that kind of loss. But he did? Not all the way. Probably never will. Elena looked at Clara. But last night when he brought you in, when he wrapped you in his coat and carried you inside, that was the first time I've seen him care about something that wasn't just duty or obligation or habit. Clara's throat tightened. I'm not his daughter. No, but maybe that's exactly why this matters. He couldn't save Sarah, but he can save you. Elena stood, brushing off her skirt. Now, I've got bread to bake and lunch to start. You can read in here or follow me around asking questions or go outside if you stay within sight of the house. Your choice. Clara chose to follow. The next few hours passed in a blur of new information. She learned that Iron Ridge Ranch ran 200 head of cattle across 3,000 acres, that the winter was their slow season, but spring would bring calving, branding, and chaos, that Elena baked bread twice a week, and the men went through it like locusts, that the well behind the house had the best water in the territory, that wolves were a constant problem, but bears were worse, that Wade had built this entire operation from nothing in less than a decade. Clara helped where she could, kneading dough, peeling potatoes, folding laundry that had dried near the stove. Small tasks, easy tasks. But each one felt significant because nobody yelled at her for being slow or clumsy or in the way. Lunch came and went. The men filed in, ate quickly, and disappeared back to their work. Wade barely spoke during the meal, his attention somewhere else entirely. Afterward, Clara found herself alone in the kitchen while Elena went to check on something in the cellar. She stood at the window washing dishes, watching the ranch operate like a living thing, men moving between buildings, horses being led to and from the barn, cattle shifting in their pens. The back door opened. Wade came in carrying an armload of firewood, which he stacked beside the stove without comment. Then he stood there, clearly working up to saying something. Finally, "You sleep all right?" Clara nodded. "Good." He shifted his weight. "Listen, Thomas wasn't wrong this morning. This situation, your stepmother, this Victor Hale character, it's going to get complicated. Might get dangerous. If you want, I can try to find somewhere else for you to go. Somewhere safer, somewhere less. I want to stay here." The words came out fast and desperate. Clara hadn't meant to sound so afraid, but the thought of being sent away again, of losing this place before she'd even had a chance to understand it. Wade's expression softened slightly. "All right, then you stay. But you need to understand what that means. When your stepmother shows up, and she will show up, things are going to get ugly. Legal battles. Maybe worse. You'll have to tell your story to strangers, judges, lawyers, people who won't automatically believe you." "I can do that." "You're 10 years old, Clara. You shouldn't have to do any of this." Wade ran a hand through his hair, frustration leaking through. "But if you're staying, then you're part of this ranch. That means rules. You do what Elena tells you. You stay close to the house unless I or one of the men is with you. You don't talk to strangers who show up without checking with me first. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "And stop calling me sir. Makes me feel old." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Wade's fine." Elena's footsteps sounded on the stairs from the cellar. Wade grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. "I'll be in the barn if you need me," he said, and left. Elena emerged carrying a crate of preserved vegetables. "What was that about?" "Wade was making sure I understand the rules." "Did he use his serious voice?" "Is there another kind?" Elena laughed. "Not really, but sometimes he tries." She set the crate on the counter. "You know what? I think we've done enough indoor work for one day. Put on your coat. I want to show you something." They bundled up and headed outside into the cold afternoon. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, turning the snow-covered landscape into something almost beautiful. Elena led Clara past the barn to a smaller building near the tree line. Inside was warm, heated by a small stove, and full of chickens. "This is my domain," Elena announced proudly. "Wade handles the cattle and horses. I handle the chickens. We've got about 30 hens and 2 very proud roosters who think they run the world." The birds clucked and fussed, moving around their roosts and nesting boxes. Clara had seen chickens before. Her father had kept a few back in Ohio. But these looked healthier, better fed, actually cared for. Here, Elena handed Clara a basket. Check the nesting boxes for eggs. The hens mostly lay in the morning, but sometimes we get afternoon surprises. Clara moved carefully through the coop, reaching into boxes, finding eggs warm from their mothers. 5 in total. She placed each one gently in the basket. Natural, Elena said approvingly. You've done this before. My father taught me. Before... Clara stopped. Before Lenora. Before everything fell apart. Before her whole world became about survival instead of living. Elena didn't push, just took the basket and headed for the door. Come on, let's get these inside before they freeze. They were halfway back to the house when hoofbeats sounded on the main road. Elena stopped walking. Her hand found Clara's shoulder, pulling her close. A single rider appeared, young, maybe 20, riding hard. He pulled up in front of the barn where Wade was working and dismounted in a hurry. Wade, the rider's voice carried across the yard. We got trouble in town. You need to hear this. Wade emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. What kind of trouble, Danny? The kind with a fancy gambler and a woman claiming you kidnapped her daughter. The egg basket slipped from Elena's hands. Clara felt the world tilt sideways. Wade's expression went very still, very dangerous. Say that again? Danny, the young rider, looked nervous. Victor Hale showed up in Silver Creek yesterday. Brought a woman with him. She's telling everyone her stepdaughter went missing on the trail. Says she's been searching everywhere. Says she heard rumors about a rancher who picked up a young girl and she wants her back. That was fast, Elena muttered. Wade stepped closer to Danny. They mentioned me by name? Not yet. But they're asking questions, describing the girl. And Hale's got connections, Wade. He's already talking to the territorial marshal, saying there should be an investigation. Clara couldn't breathe. The cold air that had felt crisp and clean moments ago now felt like it was crushing her chest. Lenora was coming. The woman who'd left her to die was going to show up and take her back and finish what she started. Wade looked across the yard and locked eyes with Clara. Something passed between them, understanding maybe, or determination. Elena, he said without looking away, take Clara inside. Don't let her out of your sight. Wade, what are you going to do? What I should have done last night. Make this legal before they can make it illegal. He turned to Danny. Ride to Silver Creek. Find Judge Morrison. Tell him I need to see him, immediately. Official business regarding a minor child in need of protection. Judge Morrison's been drinking since Tuesday. Then sober him up. I don't care how you do it, just get him here. Wade's voice left no room for argument. And Danny? Don't mention any of this to Hale or the woman. Understand? Danny nodded and remounted. He was gone within seconds, his horse kicking up snow. Miguel appeared from around the barn. Boss, I heard. What do you need? Double the watch tonight. Someone awake at all times. If anyone shows up who isn't Danny or the judge, I want to know about it before they get within 100 yards of this house. Done. The ranch exploded into controlled chaos. Men moved with purpose, checking perimeters, loading rifles, turning the peaceful ranch into something that looked ready for a siege. Elena pulled Clara toward the house. Come on, honey. Inside. But Clara couldn't move. Couldn't look away from Wade as he stood in the yard directing his men, his face hard, his movements efficient. He's going to fight for me, Clara whispered. Of course he is. Elena tugged her shoulder gently. That's what Wade does. He fights. Now come on before you freeze. Inside, Elena locked the doors, front and back, and pulled the curtains. The warm, safe house from this morning suddenly felt like a fort under siege. What's going to happen? Clara asked. Elena guided her to a chair near the stove. I don't know, but Wade's smart. He wouldn't have sent for the judge unless he had a plan. What kind of plan? The legal kind, hopefully. Elena started pulling things from cupboards, coffee, sugar, the good china that apparently only came out for important visitors. Judge Morrison's known Wade for years. If anyone can help make your situation official, it's him. But Lenora is going to have to go through proper channels now. That's what Wade's doing, making sure there are proper channels, making sure there are laws and papers and official records that say you belong here. Elena's hands shook slightly as she measured coffee. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Hours crawled by. Clara tried to read the Dickens book but couldn't focus. Tried to help Elena prepare for the judge's visit but kept messing up simple tasks. Finally gave up and just sat by the window watching the yard. Men moved in patterns, shifts changing, watch posts being manned. The whole ranch had transformed into something military and precise. Darkness fell. Lamps were lit. Elena made dinner, but nobody had much appetite. Wade came in once, briefly, to check on them. His face was unreadable. "The judge?" Elena asked. "Danny got through to him. Morrison's sobering up. Should be here by morning." Wade looked at Clara. "You need to tell me everything. Every detail you remember about your stepmother, about Victor Hale, about what happened on the trail. All of it." So Clara talked. She told him about her father's death in Nebraska, about Lenora's immediate change after the funeral, about the journey west that became a nightmare of hunger and cruelty and work that never ended, about the morning Lenora had looked at her with empty eyes and decided Clara's life was an inconvenience she no longer wanted to bear. Wade listened without interrupting. When she finished, his jaw was tight. "That's enough," he said quietly. "That's more than enough." He stood. "Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." But sleep didn't come easy. Clara lay in Sarah's bed, her bed now maybe, and listened to the house creak around her. Footsteps downstairs, voices murmuring, the sound of rifles being checked and loaded. Outside, wolves howled in the distance. And somewhere out there, moving through the darkness toward this place, Lenora was coming with her lies and her new man and all the legal weight she could muster. Clara pulled the quilt up to her chin and tried not to think about what morning would bring. But even in the dark, even scared, she wasn't alone. That had to count for something. Judge Morrison arrived at dawn looking like death warmed over. Clara watched from the upstairs window as he climbed down from Danny's wagon, moving like every bone in his body hurt. He was older than Wade by at least 20 years, with white hair that stuck up in odd directions and a coat that had seen better decades. His face had the particular gray pallor of a man who'd spent too many consecutive nights trying to find answers at the bottom of a whiskey bottle. Elena appeared beside Clara, a steaming cup of coffee in each hand. "That's our salvation? He looks like he might fall over if the wind picks up." Wade trusts him. Wade trusts his cattle instincts and his aim. His faith in people is a little more questionable. But Elena's voice held affection underneath the worry. "Come on. You should get dressed properly. First impressions matter, especially with judges." 20 minutes later, Clara sat at the kitchen table wearing the nicest of Sarah's dresses, a deep blue wool with buttons up the front and lace at the collar. Elena had braided her hair tight and clean. Clara's hands were scrubbed raw, her fingernails trimmed, every visible inch of her made as presentable as possible. She felt like she was preparing for an execution. Wade and Judge Morrison came in through the back door, bringing cold air and tension with them. The judge looked slightly more alive than he had from a distance, but not by much. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands shook as he accepted the coffee Elena offered. "Wade tells me we've got a situation," Morrison said, his voice rough as gravel. He lowered himself into a chair across from Clara like sitting down required strategic planning. "You must be the girl everyone's going to be fighting over." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Morrison took a long drink of coffee, studying her over the rim of his cup. "What's your name, child?" "Clara Whitmore, sir." "How old are you?" 10. "And you're claiming your stepmother abandoned you in the wilderness to die. That about the size of it?" The bluntness made Clara flinch, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "It's not a claim, it's what happened." "Everyone claims things happened a certain way. Doesn't make them true." Morrison set down his cup. "I need facts, girl. Dates, names, details that can be verified. You understand what I'm asking?" Wade shifted his weight against the counter, his arms crossed, watching the exchange like a hawk. Elena stood beside the stove, her hands gripping her apron tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Clara took a breath and started talking. She told Morrison about her father's death in Nebraska on August 14th, about the wagon train they'd been traveling with, the Fletcher party, 17 wagons total, about how Lenora had stayed with the group for another week before deciding to split off and head northwest toward Montana territory instead of continuing west to Oregon. "Why'd she change routes?" Morrison interrupted. "She said there was a man in Silver Creek, Victor Hale, said he'd promised her a better life than anything waiting in Oregon." Morrison's expression soured at the name. Victor Hale's a professional gambler and a part-time confidence man. Better life from him means whatever scam he's currently running. He waved for Clara to continue. Go on. She described the weeks that followed. How Lenora had started rationing Clara's food more severely. How the work had increased, hauling water, setting up camp alone, doing laundry in freezing streams while Lenora sat in the wagon. How the hits had started small, just slaps when Clara moved too slow or spoke out of turn, but grew worse as the journey continued. Did anyone see this? Morrison asked. The other travelers? We were alone by then. Lenora said we'd make better time without being slowed down by the whole train. Convenient. No witnesses. Morrison didn't sound accusatory, just tired. What happened the day she left you? Clara's throat tightened. She'd told this story to Wade and Elena, but somehow telling it to a judge, a man who held her future in his alcohol-damaged hands, made it harder. The words wanted to stick. Take your time, Wade said quietly from his position by the counter, so Clara did. She walked Morrison through that final morning, the wagon stopping in the middle of nowhere, Lenora's flat, empty voice, the bundle thrown in the snow, the wagon driving away while Clara screamed for her to stop. And then what? I tried to walk, found the bread she'd left me, but the water was frozen solid, got lost once the snow started falling harder. When it got dark, the wolves came. Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. Wade shot one, scared the others off, brought me here. Morrison looked at Wade. You got any proof of the wolf encounter? Tracks were everywhere, blood in the snow from the one I hit. Dead animal was still there when I went back the next morning to check. Could have been any wolf kill. Could have been, but it wasn't. Wade's voice went hard. I know what I saw, Morrison. Girl was surrounded. Another few minutes and we wouldn't be having this conversation. The judge drummed his fingers on the table, thinking, here's the problem. Everything you're telling me is he said, she said, until we can verify details. The wagon train. I can send telegrams, try to track down members of the Fletcher party, see if anyone remembers a woman and child splitting off. That'll take weeks, maybe months. Your stepmother's already in Silver Creek spinning her version of events. By the time we get corroboration, she could have legal standing to take you back. No. The word came out of Clara louder than she intended. I won't go back to her. I'll run away first. I'll disappear into the mountains and you'll never find me. Clara, Elena started. I mean it. I'd rather freeze to death out there than let her... Clara's voice broke. She swallowed hard, forced the words out. She looked at me like I was garbage, like throwing me away was easier than carrying me one more mile. If you send me back to her, she'll find a way to finish what she started. Morrison studied Clara for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her face made something in his expression shift. All right, I believe you. Wade straightened. Then you'll block any custody claim? I'll try. But belief and legal authority are two different things. Morrison rubbed his face, the exhaustion showing through. The law favors blood relatives, Wade. Even step relations have stronger standing than strangers. If this woman shows up with papers saying she's the legal guardian and you've got nothing but a story about finding the girl in the snow, then what do you suggest? Wade's patience was clearly wearing thin. I'm not handing her over. I'm not asking you to. I'm trying to figure out how to make your position legally defensible. Morrison looked between Wade and Clara, then at Elena still standing by the stove. You married, Wade? What? Are you married? It's a simple question. You know I'm not. Rebecca died 7 years ago. Right. So we've got an unmarried man housing a young girl with no legal relationship to her. A judge less sympathetic than me might see that as... Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully. Inappropriate. Possibly predatory. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Wade's hands curled into fists. You want to finish that thought, Morrison? I'm not saying I think that. I'm saying that's the angle Hale will use if this goes to court. He'll paint you as a lonely widower who took advantage of a vulnerable child. Doesn't matter if it's true. Just matters if it sounds plausible enough to a jury. Elena made a sound like she'd been punched. Clara felt sick. The eggs she'd forced down at breakfast threatened to come back up. Wade never... I know. Morrison said gently, but perception matters more than truth in a courtroom. He turned back to Wade. You need to create a family structure that can't be easily attacked, something that gives you legal standing as a guardian. How? Morrison's eyes flicked to Elena. The fastest way? Get married. Give the girl a two-parent household. Makes the whole thing look less questionable. The silence that followed was crushing. Elena's face had gone pale. Wade looked like he'd been hit with a fence post. Clara couldn't breathe. That's insane, Wade said finally. That's the law. Morrison stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm saying it's an option if you want to keep this girl and keep her safe. Otherwise, we're looking at a custody battle where you're starting from a losing position. There has to be another way. There isn't. Not one that works fast enough. Morrison grabbed his coat. Think about it. I'll file preliminary papers claiming you've taken temporary guardianship under emergency circumstances. That'll buy us maybe a week before Hale forces a hearing. After that? He shrugged. You better have a plan that holds up in court. He left through the back door, and the three of them stood in the kitchen, not looking at each other. Finally, Wade spoke. He's drunk. Half the time he doesn't know what day it is. We're not taking legal advice from, He's drunk, but he's not wrong. Elena's voice was steady despite her bloodless face. I've seen how this territory works, Wade. How the law treats women and children. Morrison's right. An unmarried man with a young girl? People will talk, and talk turns into accusations. And accusations turn into a judge deciding it's safer to give Clara back to her stepmother than leave her here. So what, Wade gestured helplessly. This is crazy. It's practical. It's a marriage, Elena, not a business arrangement. Why can't it be both? Elena finally looked at him directly. We've been running this household together for 5 years. We work well together, trust each other. That's more than most marriages start with. Wade paced to the window and back. You'd really do that? Tie yourself legally to a man you don't love just to protect a girl you met 2 days ago? I've done harder things for worse reasons. Elena's jaw set in a way Clara was learning meant she'd made up her mind. And who says I don't love you? I've loved you like a brother since the day I got here. That's a foundation plenty of marriages would kill for. Elena, let me finish. You're thinking about this wrong. You're thinking romance and fairy tales and all that nonsense that gets people married in the first place. I'm thinking about a child who needs a family and 2 adults who can provide one. Does it look conventional? No. Do I care? Also no. Clara found her voice. You can't get married because of me. You'd regret it. You'd hate me for ruining your lives. Elena turned to her. Clara, honey, look at me. She waited until Clara met her eyes. My life was over when my husband died, and I had to leave St. Louis with nothing but a trunk of clothes and references from people who pitied me. Wade gave me a second chance, a purpose, a home. You think marrying him to keep you safe is ruining anything? It's giving meaning to something that already works. But what if... Clara struggled to articulate the fear building in her chest. What if you meet someone you actually want to marry? What if this stops you from being happy? I'm 43 years old. I've had my great love. He died. Elena's voice softened. What I want now is to be useful, to matter, to protect people who need protecting. If that comes with a wedding ring and a legal document, so be it. Wade had gone very quiet. He stood at the window staring out at nothing, his reflection ghostly in the glass. You don't have to answer now, Elena continued. Morrison gave us a week. We can think about it. Weigh other options. But Wade? She waited until he turned to face her. Don't throw the solution away just because it's unconventional. Sometimes the best answer is the one that makes no sense, except that it works. Wade looked at Elena, then at Clara, then back to Elena. And if I say yes, if we do this, you understand it would have to look real. We'd have to sell it to everyone, the judge, the town, Clara's stepmother, no room for doubt. I understand. We'd be legally bound. Divorce isn't easy out here. Might not even be possible depending on how the territorial laws shake out. I know. And you'd really be all right with that? Being stuck with me? For the first time since Morrison had dropped his bomb, Elena smiled. Wade, I've been stuck with you for 5 years. At least this way I'd get a title that comes with legal rights. Despite everything, the fear, the pressure, the absolute insanity of what they were discussing, Wade almost laughed. You're serious? Completely. He ran both hands through his hair, making it stick up in different directions. I need to think. Then think. But do it fast. Elena started clearing the coffee cups. Clara, why don't you go upstairs for a bit? Give us some time to talk through the details. Clara didn't want to leave, didn't want to miss whatever came next. But the look Elena gave her made it clear this wasn't a request. She went upstairs and sat in her room, Sarah's room, and tried not to think about the fact that two adults were downstairs planning a marriage to save her life. Through the floor she could hear their voices, muffled but urgent. Wade's deeper rumble. Elena's sharp responses, sometimes both talking at once. Once, something that might have been Wade laughing, though the sound was bitter. Hours passed. Clara tried to read, but the words wouldn't stick. Tried to straighten the already neat room, but there was nothing out of place. Finally just sat on the bed and waited. Footsteps on the stairs. Wade appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted. We need to talk. All three of us. Back in the kitchen, Elena had made fresh coffee and set out bread and cheese like this was a normal afternoon and not the day Clara's entire future was being decided. Wade sat down across from Clara. Elena and I talked it through, looked at it from every angle we could think of. Clara's heart hammered. And we're going to do it. Get married. Make this legal. He held up a hand before Clara could speak. But you need to understand what this means for all of us. I understand. No, you don't. Not really, so listen. Wade's voice was firm but not unkind. This marriage will be real in the eyes of the law. Elena will be my wife. You'll be under our joint guardianship. When your stepmother shows up, and she will show up, we'll present a united front as a family. But Clara, this only works if you're part of it, if you're willing to stand in front of a judge and say that you want to stay here with us. I do want to stay, even if it means lying, Elena asked quietly, because that's what we'll be asking you to do. We'll be telling people we're a family that formed naturally, that Wade and I fell in love and decided to marry, and you're the child we're raising together. None of that's technically true. It's strategy, legal protection dressed up as normalcy. Clara thought about Lenora standing in front of a judge, her face arranged in false grief, spinning lies about being a concerned stepmother. Thought about Victor Hale's smooth words and manipulations. Thought about the whole system that valued blood relation over safety, appearances over truth. If lying is what keeps me away from Lenora, Clara said, then I'll lie until my tongue falls out. Wade's mouth twitched. That's settled then. He looked at Elena. How fast can we make this happen? Morrison can perform the ceremony? Tomorrow, if we push him. Tomorrow? Clara's eyes widened. The faster the better, Elena explained. Every day we wait is another day Lenora can establish her claim. If we're already married when she shows up, it strengthens our position considerably. Wade nodded. All right, tomorrow, here at the ranch. Just us, Morrison, and whoever we need for witnesses. The men will talk, Elena warned. Let them. Better our men spread the story than have it come from Hale's people. Wade stood. I'll ride to town. Bring Morrison back. Tell him to bring whatever papers we need. Elena, you handle things here. Figure out, hell, I don't know. Whatever needs figuring for a wedding. He grabbed his coat and was out the door before either of them could respond. Elena and Clara sat in the sudden silence. Are you scared? Clara asked. Terrified. Elena smiled shakily. But that's never stopped me before. She reached across the table and took Clara's hand. We're going to make this work. All three of us. You believe that? Clara wanted it so badly her chest ached. What if the judge doesn't believe we're a real family? Then we'll make him believe it. We'll be so convincing that even we start believing it ourselves. Elena squeezed her hand. You're not alone in this, Clara. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The words should have been comforting. Maybe they even were, under the fear. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were building something fragile, a house of cards that would collapse the moment Lenora breathed on it. Still, it was better than nothing, better than freezing in the snow, better than being dragged back to a woman who'd thrown her away like garbage. That night, the ranch felt different. Word had spread somehow. Ranch gossip moved faster than wildfire. and the men kept finding excuses to drift past the house, their eyes curious but not unkind. Thomas appeared at the back door with a brace of rabbits he claimed were extra from his hunting, though everyone knew he was checking to see if the rumors were true. Miguel brought firewood they didn't need. Even Frank showed up with a pie that was only slightly burned, claiming he'd made too much for himself. Clara watched from the kitchen window as Wade returned just before sunset, Judge Morrison riding behind him, looking marginally more sober than he had that morning. They disappeared into Wade's office, the door closing firmly behind them. Elena cooked dinner with fierce concentration, her movements precise and controlled. She changed into a nicer dress, still practical, but without the patches and stains of her everyday clothes. Her hair was pinned differently. Small changes. Significant ones. "Do you have a wedding dress?" Claire asked. Elena laughed. "I have a dress I got married in before. Wore it when I married Marcus back in St. Louis. But I'm not wearing that tomorrow." "Why not?" "Because that dress belongs to a different life. A different woman." Elena stirred the pot on the stove. "Tomorrow I'll wear my Sunday dress and that'll be enough. This isn't about romance, remember? It's about legal protection." But she said it like she was trying to convince herself. Dinner was awkward. Wade and Elena sat at opposite ends of the table, their usual spots. But the space between them felt loaded with everything unsaid. Morrison ate with the focus of a man who knew this might be his last good meal for a while. Clara pushed food around her plate and tried not to think about tomorrow. After dinner, Elena sent Clara to bed early despite her protests. "You need rest. Tomorrow's going to be overwhelming, even without you being exhausted." Clara went upstairs but didn't sleep. She lay in the dark listening to voices drift up from below. Wade and Morrison in the office, discussing legalities. Elena in the kitchen, the sounds of cleaning stretching longer than they needed to. Outside, the night watch changed shifts, men calling quiet confirmations to each other. Somewhere out there, Lenora slept in a comfortable bed in Silver Creek, probably already planning her performance for when she came to claim what she thought was hers. Clara pulled the quilt tighter and tried not to imagine what would happen if this plan fell apart. Morning came too fast. Elena woke Clara before dawn, her face composed but her eyes showing the lack of sleep. "Come on, we've got a lot to do before Morrison gets here." The house transformed. Elena cleaned things that were already clean, moved furniture for no apparent reason, then moved it back. She pressed her Sunday dress with an iron heated on the stove, cursing quietly when she burned her finger. She made breakfast that nobody ate. She checked the clock every 5 minutes like it might have sped up when she wasn't looking. Wade disappeared into the barn and didn't come back for 2 hours. When he did, he'd shaved and changed into clothes Clara had never seen him wear. A black suit that had probably been expensive once and still held its shape despite obvious age. He looked uncomfortable, official, like someone pretending to be a different person. The men gathered in the yard without being told, sensing something significant was happening. Thomas stood near the barn door, his weathered face unreadable. Miguel leaned against the corral fence. James, Cooper, Robert, and Frank formed a loose cluster by the equipment shed. Morrison arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, carrying a leather satchel and wearing robes that marked him as an official of the territorial court. He'd managed to clean himself up considerably, hair combed, face shaved, eyes clear despite the tremor in his hands. "Everyone ready?" he asked. Nobody answered. Ready seemed like the wrong word for what was about to happen. They gathered in the sitting room. Morrison stood near the fireplace with his satchel open on the mantel, papers visible inside. Wade and Elena stood facing him, a careful 2 feet of space between them. Clara sat in a chair to the side, trying to be invisible. The ranch hands filed in, their boots loud on the wood floor, their presence filling the room with uncomfortable warmth. Morrison cleared his throat. "We're here today to join Wade Holloway and Elena Marquez in matrimony under the laws of Montana Territory. This is a legal ceremony binding in all respects." His eyes moved to Wade and Elena. "You both understand what you're entering into?" "Yes," they said in unison. "Good. Then let's make this official." Morrison pulled papers from his satchel. "Wade Holloway, do you take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" Wade's jaw tightened. "I do." Elena Marquez, do you take this man as your lawfully wedded husband to have and to hold from this day forward, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? Elena's voice didn't waver. I do. By the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Morrison didn't add the part about kissing. Some instinct told him that would be pushing too far. Sign here. He held out the papers. Wade signed first, his handwriting bold and angular. Elena signed second, her letter smaller but equally firm. Thomas and Miguel signed as witnesses, their faces carefully neutral. And just like that, it was done. The whole thing had taken maybe 5 minutes. Wade and Elena stood side by side, legally bound, looking like they'd just survived something rather than celebrated it. Congratulations, Morrison said dryly. He handed Wade the signed certificate. You're now a family in the eyes of the law. Let's hope that's enough when the real fight starts. The real fight started 3 days later. Clara was in the chicken coop with Elena, collecting eggs and trying to pretend life had settled into something normal when Miguel came running across the yard. Wade! Riders coming in from the East Road. Through the coop's small window, Clara watched Wade emerge from the barn, rifle already in his hands. Thomas appeared from the equipment shed. The other men materialized from various corners of the ranch, all of them armed, all of them moving into defensive positions like they'd rehearsed this. Elena's hand found Clara's shoulder. Stay here. Don't come out until I tell you. But, Clara, Elena's voice was steel. Stay. Here. She left, pulling the coop door shut behind her. Clara pressed herself against the wall near the window, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. 2 horses appeared on the road. The riders came slowly, deliberately, their pace calculated to show they weren't afraid. As they got closer, Clara could make out details. The first rider was a man in his 30s wearing clothes too fine for Montana winter, a wool coat with brass buttons, leather gloves that looked new, a hat that cost more than most families spent on food in a month. Victor Hale. Had to be. The second rider made Clara's stomach drop. Lenora sat straight-backed in her saddle, wearing a black dress and a veil like she was in mourning. She'd lost weight since abandoning Clara in the snow. Her face looked gaunt, her eyes hollow, but her posture screamed righteous suffering, every inch of her playing the role of grieving stepmother. They stopped 20 yards from the house. Wade stepped forward, his rifle held loose but ready. That's close enough. State your business. Victor dismounted with practiced ease, all smooth movements and confident smile. Mr. Holloway, I presume. Victor Hale. I believe you have something that belongs to this lady. Don't know what you're talking about. Come now. Let's not play games. Victor's smile never wavered. You pulled a young girl from the wilderness several days ago. A girl matching the description of Mrs. Voss's stepdaughter, who went missing during a terrible misunderstanding on the trail. Wade's grip on his rifle tightened. Misunderstanding? That what we're calling attempted murder now? Lenora made a sound like a wounded animal. How dare you? I've been searching for Clara day and night, sick with worry. You left her in a blizzard surrounded by wolves, Elena's voice cut across the yard. She'd positioned herself near Wade, presenting a united front. Don't insult our intelligence by pretending otherwise. I did no such thing. Lenora's performance was impressive. Tears in her voice, hands trembling on the reins. There was a confusion during a stop. The weather turned suddenly. By the time I realized Clara had wandered off, she didn't wander off. Wade's voice was flat. You threw her out of your wagon like trash. Victor held up a placating hand. These accusations are quite serious, Mr. Holloway. Perhaps we should let the authorities sort out what actually happened. In the meantime, Mrs. Voss simply wants her stepdaughter returned. Surely you can understand a mother's concern. She's not Clara's mother. She's her legal guardian. Clara's father married Mrs. Voss before his untimely death, making her the child's next of kin. Victor pulled papers from his coat. I have the marriage certificate right here, legally witnessed, properly filed. Mrs. Voss has every right to her stepdaughter's custody. Wade didn't move. Clara's not going anywhere. I'm afraid that's not your decision to make. Victor's smile took on an edge. You're holding a child who doesn't belong to you. In some territories, that's called kidnapping. In Montana territory, it's called saving a life. Judge Morrison's voice rang out from the house's front porch. He'd been inside reviewing papers, but now he stood in full view, still wearing his judicial robes. And as the territorial judge for this district, I'm the one who decides what's legal and what isn't. Victor's smile faltered for just a second. Your Honor, I didn't realize you were involved in this matter. I'm involved now. Morrison descended the porch steps, moving like a man 20 years younger despite the hangover Clara knew he was fighting. Mr. Holloway came to me immediately after finding the child, filed emergency guardianship papers, all proper and legal. Emergency guardianship is temporary, Victor countered smoothly. It doesn't supersede blood relation. No, but marriage does. Morrison gestured to Wade and Elena. Mr. and Mrs. Holloway were married 2 days ago. The child is now under their joint custody as a family unit. That's considerably harder to challenge than a single man's guardianship. Lenora's facade cracked. They got married? In 3 days? That's obviously a sham. They don't even— Careful, Mrs. Voss. Morrison's voice went cold. Accusing people of marriage fraud is a serious charge, especially when the marriage was performed by a territorial judge and witnessed by 6 upstanding men. You prepared to back up that accusation in court? Victor put a hand on Lenora's arm, silencing her. His eyes moved between Wade, Elena, and Morrison, calculating. This is quite the convenient arrangement, but it doesn't change the fundamental question. Mrs. Voss is the child's legal stepmother. She has rights. She abandoned those rights when she left Clara to die, Wade said. That's Clara's version of events, a traumatized child's interpretation of what might have been a tragic accident. Then let's ask Clara. Elena's voice was steady. Let's bring her out here and see who she wants to stay with. She's 10 years old. Lenora's composure was shredding. She doesn't understand what's in her own best interest. She's been poisoned against me by these people who want to use her for their own purposes. What purposes would those be? Morrison asked mildly. Lenora's mouth opened and closed. Victor stepped in smoothly. Young girls on frontier ranches have been exploited before, Your Honor. I'm sure you're aware of the unfortunate patterns. A lonely widower, an impressionable child. Wade moved so fast Clara almost missed it. One moment he was standing still. The next he had Victor by the coat, his rifle discarded, his other hand cocked back in a fist. Wade, no! Elena grabbed his arm. Don't give him ammunition. For a long moment Wade stood frozen, his face inches from Victor's, every muscle in his body screaming violence. Then he shoved the gambler away hard enough to send him stumbling. Get off my land, Wade said, his voice shaking with restrained fury. Both of you, now. Victor straightened his coat, his smile gone, replaced with something harder. We'll be filing a formal custody petition. You'll be served papers within the week. And Mr. Holloway? He mounted his horse with deliberate calm. That little display of temper? That'll look real good in court when I'm explaining to a judge why a violent man shouldn't be raising a young girl. He turned his horse. Lenora followed, her performance of grief shifting to something uglier, bitter satisfaction that showed in the set of her shoulders. They rode away slowly, making everyone watch them go. Nobody moved until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Then Wade turned and punched the fence post hard enough to split his knuckles. God damn it! You gave him exactly what he wanted. Thomas's voice was resigned, not angry. He baited you, and you took it. I know. Wade examined his bleeding hand without interest. I know. Elena grabbed his wrist, her touch firm. Inside. We need to wrap that before you get it infected. She looked at Morrison. How bad is this? The judge had aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. Bad. He'll use Wade's temper against him, paint him as unstable, dangerous, not fit to raise a child. But the marriage helps, but it's not a guarantee. Morrison pulled off his robes, suddenly looking tired again. They'll push for a formal hearing, bring witnesses, character attacks. It's going to get ugly. Clara couldn't stay hidden anymore. She pushed open the coupe door and ran across the yard, her legs shaking, her vision blurred with tears. This is my fault. I should have stayed quiet. I should have— Elena caught her, pulled her close. Stop. None of this is your fault. But Wade got angry because of me, and now they're going to use it against him, and— Clara. Wade's voice cut through her spiral. His hand was still bleeding, but his eyes were clear. Look at me. She did, Barely. I got angry because that son of a bitch implied I'd hurt you. That's on him, not you. You understand? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. Now let's get inside and figure out what we're doing next. The kitchen became a war room. Morrison spread papers across the table. Marriage certificates, guardianship documents, territorial law references. Wade sat with his hand wrapped in bandages, his jaw tight. Elena made coffee, nobody drank, and bread nobody ate. Clara perched on a stool in the corner, trying to be invisible while absorbing every word. They'll argue the marriage is fraudulent, Morrison said, shuffling through documents. Claim you only did it to secure custody. Which is true, Wade pointed out. Doesn't matter. What matters is whether we can prove it's also a legitimate marriage. Morrison looked at Elena. You're going to have to sell this, both of you. Public displays of affection, sleeping in the same room, acting like an actual married couple, not two people running a business arrangement. Elena's face went carefully blank. We can do that. Can you? Because Hale's going to be watching, looking for cracks. Any sign that this is performance instead of reality, and he'll exploit it. We said we'd make it convincing. Elena's voice was steady. We meant it. Morrison turned to Clara. And you're going to have to testify. Tell your story in court in front of your stepmother and everyone else. Think you can do that? Clara's stomach twisted. I have to, don't I? If you want to stay here, yes. They'll try to break you. Make you doubt your own memory. Suggest you're lying to please your new guardians. It won't be easy. I don't care if it's easy. I care if it works. Something like approval flickered across Morrison's face. Fair enough. Then we start preparing. I'll need written statements from everyone. Timeline of events. List of witnesses who can corroborate any part of Clara's story. And we need to find members of that wagon train, the Fletcher party. Get testimony that Lenore and Clara were traveling together, that they split off from the group. Anything that proves Clara's not making this up. That'll take time, Thomas said from his position leaning against the door. Wagon trains scatter? Could be anywhere by now. Then we work fast and hope we get lucky. Morrison gathered his papers. Hearing's going to be in Silver Creek 2 weeks from today if Hale pushes hard, which he will. That gives us 14 days to build a case strong enough that a judge has no choice but to rule in our favor. And if we can't? Wade asked. Morrison met his eyes. Then Clara goes back to her stepmother, and there's nothing any of us can do about it. The silence that followed was crushing. Finally, Elena spoke. Then we better not fail. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Morrison sent telegrams to every town along the Oregon Trail, trying to track down members of the Fletcher Wagon Party. He drafted legal briefs, researched precedents, built arguments from territorial law that most people didn't even know existed. Wade and Elena played their roles with grim determination. They moved Wade's belongings into Elena's room, ate meals sitting close together, walked the property with Elena's hand tucked into Wade's arm. Small gestures calculated to be noticed by the ranch hands, by any visitors, by anyone who might be called to testify about the legitimacy of their marriage. Clara watched them perform affection that looked real enough to hurt. Watched Wade pull out Elena's chair at dinner. Watched Elena adjust Wade's collar before he rode out to check the herd. Watched them navigate this new reality with the efficiency of soldiers executing orders. But at night, through the walls, Clara could hear them talking in low voices, arguing sometimes, Wade's frustration bleeding through, Elena's sharp responses, the sound of two people trying to merge lives that had been separate for good reasons. Clara buried herself in preparations for the hearing. Morrison drilled her on her testimony, made her repeat the story of that day in the snow until she could recite it without crying, taught her how to answer questions, how to stick to facts, how to not let lawyers twist her words into something they weren't. They'll try to confuse you, Morrison warned during one particularly brutal practice session. Ask you the same question 5 different ways, hoping you'll contradict yourself. Stay calm. Take your time. If you don't understand a question, say so. Don't guess. What if I mess up? Then you recover and keep going. You're a 10-year-old girl who survived being abandoned in the wilderness. That's your strength. Don't hide it. 6 days before the hearing, a telegram arrived. Morrison read it twice, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at Wade. Found them. 3 families from the Fletcher party. They're in Oregon City. Remember a woman and a girl splitting off from the group in late September? That's good, right? Elena asked. It's something, but they're 200 miles away, can't get here in time for the hearing. Morrison set down the telegram. I can submit their written statements, but it's not the same as live testimony. Hale's lawyer will argue it's hearsay. Wade's jaw tightened. So we're still fighting with one hand tied. We're fighting with what we have, which is more than we had a week ago. 3 days before the hearing, Lenora made her next move. A notice appeared in the Silver Creek newspaper. Clara didn't see it until Miguel brought a copy back from town and showed it to Wade with apologetic eyes. The headline read, "Heartbroken Mother Seeks Return of Stolen Daughter." The article beneath was a masterpiece of manipulation. Lenora painted herself as a devoted stepmother whose husband had died tragically, leaving her to care for his daughter alone. She described the terrible day Clara had wandered away from camp during a blizzard, the desperate search, the agony of thinking the child was dead, the miracle of hearing Clara was alive, followed by the horror of learning a rancher had taken her and refused to return her. Wade read it in silence, his face carved from stone. "She's turning the whole town against us," Elena said quietly, "before we even get to court." "Let her." Wade crumpled the paper. "All the lies in the world don't change what actually happened." But Clara saw the worry in his eyes, saw how his hand shook slightly as he tossed the paper into the stove, saw Elena's fingers tighten on his shoulder in a gesture that might have been comfort, or might have been her own need for reassurance. The night before the hearing, nobody slept. Clara lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through her testimony in her head. Every detail Morrison had made her memorize, every answer she'd practiced, every moment of that day in the snow that she'd have to relive in front of strangers. Down the hall, she could hear Wade and Elena talking. "What if we lose?" Elena's voice was barely audible through the wall. "We won't." "But if we do?" "We won't, Elena. You can't promise that. You can't control what a judge decides." Silence. Then Wade's voice, quieter, rougher. "If we lose, I'll take her and run. Head north into Canada. Disappear where they can't find us." "Wade, that's insane. You'd be a fugitive. You'd lose everything. The ranch, your name, everything you've built." "I've lost everything before. I survived it. This is different." "No. It's exactly the same. Except this time I have a choice. I can fight, or I can let someone innocent suffer because I was too afraid to act." Movement, footsteps pacing. "Sarah died in my arms, and I couldn't do anything except hold her and watch her go. You think I can do that again? Watch another child be destroyed because I followed rules that don't protect the people who need protecting?" I know. Elena's voice cracked. "I just don't want you to throw away your life for what? For Clara? She's not worth it? That what you were going to say?" "Of course not. I was going to say for a fight you might not win. But we're past that now, aren't we? We're all in, all of us." More silence. Then sounds that might have been crying or might have been something else. Clara pressed her face into her pillow and tried not to hear. Morning came gray and cold. They dressed in their best clothes, Wade in his black suit, Elena in a deep green dress that made her look formidable, Clara in a navy blue dress with white collar that Elena had altered to fit perfectly. They ate breakfast without tasting it. Loaded into the wagon with Morrison already waiting outside. The ride to Silver Creek took 3 hours. Clara watched the landscape pass, white snow, dark trees, mountains that didn't care about human problems. She thought about running, about jumping from the wagon and disappearing into the wilderness. Would Wade and Elena's lives be easier without her? Would they secretly be relieved? As if reading her mind, Elena's hand found Clara's and held tight. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. The message was clear. They were in this together, all the way to whatever end came. Silver Creek appeared like a scar on the landscape, a sprawl of wooden buildings clinging to survival in the Montana winter. The courthouse was the largest structure, 2 stories of stone and timber with territorial flags hanging limp in the windless morning. People crowded the street outside. News of the custody hearing had spread. Claire recognized faces from the ranch, Thomas, Miguel, the other hands who'd come to support Wade. But there were others too, townspeople, curious strangers, women in fine dresses whispering behind gloved hands, men in suits studying Wade with calculating eyes. and near the courthouse steps, surrounded by a small crowd of supporters, stood Lenora and Victor. Lenora had perfected her costume, widow's black with just enough wear to suggest hardship, her hair pulled back severely, her face arranged in an expression of tragic dignity. Victor stood beside her like a guard dog, his expensive coat drawing envious glances, his smile promising everyone that justice would prevail. When they saw Wade's wagon, Lenora let out a theatrical gasp. "Clara! Oh, my poor child!" She started toward them, arms outstretched, but Victor caught her elbow. "Not yet, my dear. Let the law handle this properly." The crowd murmured. Some faces showed sympathy for Lenora, others looked skeptical. A few watched Wade with open hostility. Morrison climbed down from the wagon and offered Elena his hand. "Ignore them. Eyes forward. We've got a job to do." They walked into the courthouse through a gauntlet of stairs. The courtroom was smaller than Clara expected. Wooden benches, a judge's platform, windows that let in weak winter light. It smelled like old paper and older wood and fear. Judge Morrison led them to a table on the right side. Lenora and Victor took the table on the left. The gallery filled quickly. Ranch hands, townspeople, anyone who could squeeze inside to watch the show. A door opened behind the judge's bench. The presiding judge entered, not Morrison, who couldn't hear his own case, but Judge Samuel Blackwood, brought in from the territorial capital specifically for this hearing. He was older than Morrison, with white hair and a face that gave nothing away. He settled into his seat and surveyed the room with eyes that had seen every kind of human ugliness. "This is a custody hearing regarding the minor child Clara Whitmore," he announced. "The petitioner is Mrs. Lenora Voss, claiming rights as stepmother and legal guardian. The respondents are Mr. and Mrs. Wade Holloway, currently housing the child and contesting the petition. Is that accurate?" Both tables answered in the affirmative. "Good. Then let's proceed." Blackwood looked at Victor, who stood smoothly. "Mr. Hale, you're representing Mrs. Voss?" "I am, Your Honor." "Then present your case." Victor moved to the center of the room like an actor taking the stage. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of reuniting a child with her legal guardian. Mrs. Voss married Clara's father, Thomas Whitmore, in the spring of 1871. When Mr. Whitmore tragically died of fever during their journey west, Mrs. Voss became Clara's sole guardian. She cared for the child despite her own grief, despite the hardships of frontier travel, despite having no legal obligation to do so." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then came the day that changed everything. A terrible storm, confusion. Clara wandered from camp. Mrs. Voss searched desperately, but the weather forced her to take shelter. She assumed the worst, that her stepdaughter had perished in the wilderness. Imagine her shock when she learned Clara was alive. And imagine her horror when Mr. Holloway refused to return the child, instead creating this sham marriage to justify keeping someone else's daughter. Morrison was on his feet. "Objection. The marriage is legal and properly documented. Mr. Hale's characterization is inflammatory and unsupported." "Sustained." Blackwood's voice was dry. "Mr. Hale, stick to facts." "Of course, Your Honor." Victor's smile never faltered. "The facts are simple. Mrs. Voss is Clara's legal guardian. The Holloways are strangers who inserted themselves into a family matter. We're asking the court to restore the natural order and return Clara to the woman who has every legal right to raise her." He sat down, looking satisfied. Judge Blackwood turned to Morrison. "Response?" Morrison stood slowly. He didn't have Victor's polish or theatrical presence, but when he spoke, his voice carried weight. "Your Honor, what Mr. Hale calls wandering from camp was actually abandonment with intent to cause death. What he calls confusion was a deliberate act of cruelty. And what he calls a sham marriage is a desperate measure by good people trying to protect a child from the woman who tried to kill her." The crowd erupted. Blackwood's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Order! I'll have order or I'll clear this courtroom." Silence fell, fragile and tense. "Those are serious accusations, Mr. Morrison," Blackwood said. "I have serious evidence, Your Honor." Morrison gestured to Clara. "The child herself will testify. But first I'd like to call Mr. Wade Holloway to the stand." Wade stood and walked to the witness chair like he was heading for execution. His face was blank, his movements controlled, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. Morrison established the basics quickly. Wade's name, his ranch, his standing in the community. Then, tell the court how you came to find Clara. Wade's voice was steady. I was riding home late, heard wolves, found them circling a girl half frozen in the snow, scared them off and brought her back to my ranch. What condition was she in? Starving, hypothermic, bruised, terrified? Did she tell you what happened? Said her stepmother threw her out of the wagon, left her to die. Victor objected. Hearsay, Your Honor. The child will testify herself, Morrison countered. Mr. Holloway is simply establishing timeline. I'll allow it. Continue. Morrison walked Wade through the next days, bringing Clara to the ranch, Elena's care, the decision to seek legal guardianship. Then he asked the question Clara knew was coming. Why did you marry Mrs. Marquez? Wade didn't hesitate. To protect Clara. Judge Morrison told us an unmarried man raising a young girl would look questionable. He was right. So Elena and I got married to create a family structure that couldn't be easily attacked. So you admit the marriage was strategic? It was practical. Doesn't make it less real. Do you love your wife, Mr. Holloway? The courtroom went silent. Wade's eyes found Elena across the room. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. I respect her, trust her, depend on her. We've built something together over 5 years that works. If that's not love, it's close enough. Elena's face was unreadable, but her hands were clasped tight in her lap. Morrison nodded. No further questions. Victor stood for cross-examination, his smile sharp. Mr. Holloway, you said you found Clara surrounded by wolves, but you didn't actually see Mrs. Voss abandon her, did you? No. So everything you know about that day comes from a traumatized 10-year-old's testimony, correct? That's one way to put it. Is there another way? I know what I saw when I found her. I know the state she was in. I know wolf tracks don't lie. But children do, especially when they're scared and want to please the adults who took them in. Wade's knuckles went white on the chair arm. Clara wasn't lying. How can you be certain? Because I've seen liars, Mr. Hale. I've seen con artists and manipulators. I've seen people spin stories to get what they want. Wade leaned forward. And I'm looking at one right now. The gavel came down hard. Mr. Holloway, you'll answer questions, not make accusations. Apologies, Your Honor. Wade didn't sound apologetic. Victor continued, unfazed. Let's talk about your temper, Mr. Holloway. Isn't it true that just days ago you physically assaulted me on your property? I grabbed your coat. Didn't hit you, though the temptation was considerable. Because I suggested you might have inappropriate intentions toward Clara? Because you implied I would hurt a child, Wade's voice rose. Any decent human being would have been angry. Angry enough to lose control? To become violent? Morrison objected, but the damage was done. The crowd had seen Wade's fury, his barely restrained violence. Victor had made his point. When Wade stepped down, his face was carved from stone. Judge Blackwood checked the time. We'll break for lunch. Resume in 1 hour. The courtroom emptied slowly. Clara sat frozen in her seat, watching Lenora across the room. Her stepmother was surrounded by supporters, all of them offering sympathy and outrage. She played her part perfectly. The wronged mother, the victim of cruel strangers. Their eyes met across the room. For just a second, Lenora's mask slipped. The grief vanished. What replaced it was cold satisfaction. Then she looked away, and the performance resumed. Clara felt Elena's hand on her shoulder. Come on, let's get some air. Outside, the day had turned colder. Clouds rolled in from the north, promising snow. Wade stood apart from everyone, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. Thomas and the ranch hands formed a protective circle, keeping curious townspeople at bay. Morrison appeared beside Elena. That could have gone better. Could have gone worse, Elena countered. At least Wade didn't actually hit him. Small mercies. Morrison looked at Clara. You're up after lunch. You ready? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Remember what we practiced. Facts. No embellishments. If you don't remember something, say so. Don't let Hale push you into guessing. I know. And Clara? Morrison's expression softened slightly. Whatever happens in there, you tell the truth. That's all we can ask. Lunch was bread and cheese from Elena's basket, eaten without appetite. The hour passed too quickly. Then they were filing back into the courtroom, taking their seats, preparing for the fight to continue. Judge Blackwood returned to his bench. Mr. Morrison, call your next witness. Morrison stood. The defense calls Clara Whitmore. Clara's legs barely held her as she walked to the witness chair. The courtroom felt huge, full of faces all turned toward her. Lenora sat perfectly still at her table, her expression carefully neutral. Morrison approached gently. Clara, can you state your full name for the record? Clara Elizabeth Whitmore. How old are you? 10 years old? And where are you currently living? Iron Ridge Ranch with Wade and Elena Holloway? How did you come to be at Iron Ridge Ranch? Clara took a breath and started talking. She told them about her father's death, about Lenora's cruelty during the journey west, about the morning she was thrown from the wagon. She described the cold, the fear, the wolves, Wade's rescue, the safety she'd found at the ranch. Morrison asked gentle questions, guiding her through the story. Clara stuck to facts, just like he'd taught her. Didn't cry, didn't embellish, just told the truth in a voice that shook but didn't break. Then Morrison asked the question that mattered most. Clara, do you want to go back to living with Mrs. Voss? No. The word came out fierce. Never. I'd rather die. Why? Because she hates me. Because she tried to kill me once and she'll try again. Because she doesn't want a daughter. She wants me gone. Morrison nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. He sat down and Victor stood up. The real battle was about to begin. Victor Hale circled Clara's chair like a predator sizing up prey. Clara, he began, his voice honey smooth, you've told us a very dramatic story, but I have to ask, are you sure you remember everything correctly? You were cold, scared, perhaps even delirious. Memory can play tricks under those conditions. Clara's hands gripped the chair arms. I remember. Do you? Let's test that. Victor pulled out a small notebook. You said your father died on August 14th. Are you certain of that date? Yes. Not the 13th or the 15th? August 14th. It was a Monday. There was a full moon that night. Victor's smile tightened. Impressive detail. Almost too impressive for a traumatized child. Makes one wonder if someone coached you. Morrison shot to his feet. Objection. Mr. Hale is testifying, not questioning. Sustained. Ask questions, Mr. Hale. Victor changed tactics. You say Mrs. Voss hit you. Where exactly? Clara's throat went dry. My arms. My back. Once across the face when I dropped a water bucket. Show me the bruises. They're gone. It's been weeks. How convenient. Victor moved closer. So we're supposed to believe these injuries existed based solely on your word. I saw them. Wade's voice cut across the courtroom. Judge Blackwood's gavel came down. Mr. Holloway, you'll have your turn. The witness will answer. Blackwood looked at Clara. Were there witnesses to these alleged beatings? No. We were alone by then. That's why Lenora, Mrs. Voss, waited. She knew nobody would see. Victor pounced. So again, no proof, just your story. He flipped through his notes. Let's talk about the day you were allegedly abandoned. You said it was snowing. How hard? Hard enough I couldn't see more than a few feet. Yet you could see the wagon drive away. Clara hesitated. I saw it leave before the snow got really bad. Before. So when Mrs. Voss left, visibility wasn't actually that poor. It was getting worse fast. But at the moment of separation you could see clearly, meaning Mrs. Voss could also see clearly, meaning if you'd simply called out, she would have heard you and stopped. I did call out. I screamed until my throat bled. Or perhaps you wandered off despite Mrs. Voss's instructions to stay with the wagon. Perhaps you got turned around in the snow and blamed her for your own mistake. Clara's voice rose. She told me to get out. She threw my things in the snow and drove away. According to you, a child who's now living in comfort with people who clearly want to keep you. Tell me, Clara, has anyone at Iron Ridge Ranch told you what to say today? No! Come now, you've been living there for weeks. Surely Mr. and Mrs. Holloway discussed the hearing with you, prepared you, maybe even suggested how to make your story more convincing. Morrison was objecting, but Clara couldn't hear him over the rushing in her ears. They told me to tell the truth. Their version of the truth, or what actually happened? Victor leaned against the witness box, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. I understand why you'd want to stay at the ranch, Clara. It's nice there, warm, safe. Better than the hard journey west with a stepmother you didn't choose. But lying to a judge? That's serious. You could get in real trouble. I'm not lying. Then why did Mrs. Voss spend days searching for you? Why did she report you missing to every settlement between here and Nebraska? Why would a woman who wanted you dead go to such lengths? Clara opened her mouth and nothing came out, because she didn't know. Hadn't thought about what Lenora did after driving away. Had assumed the woman just continued to Silver Creek without looking back. Victor saw her hesitation and pressed harder. You can't answer, can you? Because maybe, just maybe, you've convinced yourself of a version of events that didn't actually happen. Maybe Mrs. Voss's account is the truth, a tragic misunderstanding, a child who wandered off, a stepmother who searched desperately and found only grief. That's not... She didn't... Clara's voice cracked. Tears burned her eyes and she hated herself for it, hated that Victor was making her look weak and confused. Let me ask you something else. Victor's tone shifted, became almost fatherly. Do you know what Mr. Holloway lost 7 years ago? Morrison was on his feet again. Objection! Relevance! I'm establishing motive, Your Honor. The court's indulgence, please. Judge Blackwood considered. I'll allow it, but make your point quickly, Mr. Hale. Victor turned back to Clara. Mr. Holloway's wife and infant daughter died in childbirth. Did you know that? Clara nodded miserably. And that daughter, Sarah, would be about your age now if she'd lived. Quite a coincidence, don't you think? A grieving father who lost his little girl, suddenly finding another little girl to replace her? Wade's not replacing anyone, isn't he? Think about it, Clara. A lonely man, desperate to fill the hole in his life. Along comes a vulnerable child. Of course he'd want to keep you. Of course he'd marry his housekeeper to make it legal. You're not being saved. You're being used to heal his trauma. That's not true. But even as Clara said it, doubt crept in. Was she being used? Had Wade really saved her or just grabbed onto something to ease his own pain? Your Honor, this is outrageous. Morrison's face was red. Mr. Hale is manipulating a child witness. I'm asking legitimate questions about motive and credibility. Victor remained calm. Questions the court needs answered. Judge Blackwood looked torn. Mr. Hale, I'm giving you considerable latitude here, but you're approaching the line. Ask your questions and move on. Victor nodded. Clara, final question. If Mrs. Voss really wanted you dead, why would she be here now? Why fight in court for custody of a child she supposedly tried to kill? Wouldn't it be easier to just let you go? The logic was sound enough to shake Clara's certainty. She looked across the courtroom at Lenora, who sat with tears streaming down her face, the picture of maternal anguish. I don't know, Clara whispered. You don't know? Because none of this makes sense unless we accept the simpler explanation, that you're a frightened, confused child who's rewritten history to justify staying somewhere comfortable. Victor straightened. No further questions, Your Honor. He returned to his seat looking satisfied. Clara sat in the witness chair feeling like she'd been torn apart. Morrison approached for redirect, but the damage was done. Her testimony, the foundation of their entire case, had been shredded. Clara, Morrison said gently, Mr. Hale suggested you're confused about what happened, are you? No, I know what I saw. He suggested the Holloways are using you to replace their dead daughter. Do you believe that? Clara looked at Wade. He sat rigid in his chair, his face carefully blank, but she could see the pain in his eyes. Pain at having his grief weaponized. Pain at watching Clara suffer on the stand. No, she said firmly. Wade and Elena aren't replacing anyone. They're helping me because it's the right thing to do. Even though it's cost them peace, safety, their privacy? Yes. Morrison nodded. Thank you, Clara. Nothing further. Clara returned to her seat on shaking legs. Elena's arm came around her shoulders immediately, pulling her close. Clara buried her face in Elena's side and tried not to fall apart completely. Judge Blackwood called for the next witness. Victor stood. The petitioner calls Mrs. Lenora Voss. Lenora approached the stand like she was walking through a nightmare. Her steps were hesitant, her hands trembling. She took the oath in a voice barely above a whisper. Victor's questioning was masterful. He walked Lenora through her marriage to Thomas Whitmore, painting it as a love match. Described her devotion to Clara despite the girl not being her blood. Built a portrait of a woman trying her best under impossible circumstances. Tell the court about the day Clara went missing, Victor prompted. Lenore's voice shook. We'd stopped to rest the horses. The weather was turning. I told Clara to stay close to the wagon while I gathered firewood. When I came back, her voice broke. She was gone. I searched everywhere, called her name until I had no voice left. But the snow was so thick I couldn't see anything. What did you do? I waited as long as I dared, but I was alone. The temperature was dropping, and I had to make a terrible choice, keep searching and likely freeze to death or seek help. Lenora wiped her eyes. I drove to the nearest settlement, reported her missing, organized search parties, checked every ranch, every camp, every place she might have gone. For weeks I looked, weeks of thinking she was dead. And when you learned Mr. Holloway had her, I was overjoyed, then horrified when he refused to let me see her, claimed I'd abandoned her deliberately, as if I would ever— Lenora couldn't continue. Sobs racked her body. It was a performance worthy of any theater, and the courtroom was buying it. Claire could see it in their faces, sympathy replacing skepticism. Even Judge Blackwood looked moved. Morrison's cross-examination tried to punch holes in the story. Mrs. Voss, you said you were gathering firewood in a blizzard? It was just starting. I thought I had time. And you left a 10-year-old child alone with the wagon? For just a few minutes. I never imagined— More tears. How long were you gone? I don't know, 10 minutes? 15? Time became confused in the storm. Yet in that brief time, Clara allegedly wandered far enough away that you couldn't find her? Children can cover surprising distance when they panic. Morrison tried several more approaches, but Lenora had an answer for everything. Plausible, sympathetic, impossible to definitively disprove. When she stepped down, the courtroom sentiment had shifted. Clara could feel it like a physical weight. They believed Lenora, believed the grieving stepmother over the traumatized child. Judge Blackwood checked his notes. Any more witnesses? Morrison stood. The defense calls Elena Holloway. Elena walked to the stand with her spine straight and her chin high. She took the oath in a clear voice. Morrison established her position at the ranch, her role in Clara's care. Then, Mrs. Holloway, why did you agree to marry Wade? To protect Clara, to give her a family that couldn't be easily broken apart. Do you love your husband? Elena's eyes found Wade across the room. When I came to Iron Ridge Ranch 5 years ago, I was broken. My husband had died. My life in St. Louis was over. I had nothing except the willingness to work hard. Wade gave me purpose, a home, a partnership built on mutual respect and trust. She paused. Is that love? I think so. It's not the love songs talk about, but it's real, it's lasting, and it's enough. Enough to raise a child together? More than enough. Clara needs stability, safety, people who'll fight for her. Wade and I can give her that. Victor's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned the timeline of the marriage, suggested it was purely transactional, implied that Elena was either complicit in child theft or a fool being manipulated by a desperate man. Elena held firm through all of it. Clara was dying when Wade found her. Everything we've done since then has been to keep her alive and safe. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty and proud of it. The testimony ended. Judge Blackwood called for closing arguments. Victor went first, spinning a narrative of tragic misunderstanding and opportunistic outsiders. He painted the Holloways as well-meaning but ultimately wrong. Painted Lenora as a victim twice over, first losing the child, then being accused of abandonment. The law is clear, Your Honor. Blood relation matters. Mrs. Voss is Clara's legal guardian. The Holloways are strangers who inserted themselves into a family matter. We ask the court to restore the natural order and return this child to the woman who loves her. Morrison stood for his closing. He looked old and tired, but his voice was steady. Your Honor, Mr. Hale talks about natural order, but there's nothing natural about a woman who leaves a child in a blizzard. Nothing natural about choosing convenience over life. The Holloways aren't perfect. Their marriage started as strategy, but it's become something real, a family built not on blood, but on choice, on the decision that Clara's life matters. He gestured to Clara. This child survived the impossible, survived cold that would have killed grown men, survived wolves, survived abandonment. She did that because she's strong, but strength only goes so far. Eventually, we all need someone to fight for us. That's what the Holloways are doing. That's what Mrs. Voss failed to do. Morrison gathered his papers. The law favors blood relation, but the law also recognizes that parents can forfeit their rights through abandonment and neglect. Mrs. Voss forfeited hers the moment she drove away. We asked the court to recognize that and to let Clara stay with the people who actually want her alive. Judge Blackwood spent a long time reviewing his notes. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, he spoke. This is one of the more difficult cases I've presided over. Both sides have presented compelling arguments. Both sides clearly believe they're fighting for what's right. Clara's fingernails dug into her palms. However, the law is not about what we believe. It's about what we can prove. Blackwood looked at Clara. I believe this child suffered. I believe she was afraid. But fear and suffering don't automatically indicate criminal intent on Mrs. Voss's part. No. The word screamed through Clara's mind but couldn't escape her throat. The evidence suggests a tragic accident compounded by harsh conditions and poor judgment. Mrs. Voss made mistakes, serious mistakes, but mistakes are not the same as malice. Elena's hand found Clara's and squeezed so hard it hurt. That said, Blackwood's tone shifted. I also have concerns about returning a child to a situation where trust has been so completely destroyed. Clara clearly does not want to return to Mrs. Voss's care. That preference must be weighed. Hope flickered. Tiny. Fragile. Therefore, I'm ordering a compromise. Clara will remain with the Holloways temporarily, 90 days supervised custody. During that time, Mrs. Voss will have weekly visitation rights, supervised by an officer of the court. If at the end of 90 days Clara's situation remains stable and healthy, we'll revisit permanent custody. If issues arise, we'll reconvene immediately. The gavel came down. Neither side had won. Neither side had lost. Clara was stuck in legal limbo with a woman she hated given access to her life every single week. She felt like she might throw up. Lenora made a sound like a wounded animal. Victor was immediately at her side, whispering urgently. Across the room, Wade sat frozen, his face unreadable. Morrison turned to them. It's not perfect, but it's better than losing her today. We can work with this. Could they? Clara wasn't sure. 90 days of waiting, 90 days of Lenora showing up, playing her role, looking for weaknesses. 90 days of uncertainty. The courtroom emptied slowly. People filed out, gossiping, judging, caring more about the drama than the actual child at its center. Wade stood and walked over to where Lenore and Victor were gathering their things. You come near her, Wade said quietly. You follow every letter of that visitation order. You step 1 inch out of line, I'll have you back in court so fast your head will spin. Victor smiled. Careful, Mr. Holloway. Threatening language in front of witnesses isn't wise. It's not a threat. It's a promise. Lenore looked up, and for just a second her mask slipped again. Clara saw the hatred there, the bitter satisfaction of partial victory. Then it was gone, replaced by trembling maternal concern. I just want what's best for Clara, Lenora whispered. Then leave her alone. Outside, snow had started falling, thick, heavy flakes that turned the world white. The ranch hands clustered around the wagon, their faces grim. What's the verdict? Thomas asked. 90 days temporary custody. Weekly supervised visits from the stepmother. Wade's voice was flat. Could be worse. Could be better. Could be a lot of things. Wade helped Elena and Clara into the wagon. Let's go home. The ride back was silent. Clara watched the landscape pass and thought about Lenora's face, about 90 more days of fear, about what would happen at the end of that time. Elena's arm came around her shoulders. We'll get through this. Will we? We don't have a choice, so yes. It wasn't much comfort, but it was something. The first supervised visit happened 6 days later. A court officer named Mrs. Patterson arrived at Iron Ridge Ranch at exactly 9 in the morning, accompanied by Lenora in her widow's costume. Wade and Elena stood on the porch like sentries. Clara stayed inside, her stomach churning. Mrs. Patterson knocked. Wade answered. We're here for the court-ordered visitation, Mrs. Patterson announced. She was older, severe-looking, with eyes that missed nothing. Fine. She can visit in the sitting room. We'll be in the kitchen. The order says privacy for bonding. The order says supervised. We're supervising from the next room with the door open. That's as much privacy as she gets. Mrs. Patterson looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Wade's expression stopped her. Very well. Lenora entered the house moving slowly, carefully, playing the role of uncertain mother approaching a frightened child. Clara stood in the sitting room doorway, her hands clenched into fists. "Hello, Clara," Lenora said softly. Clara didn't answer. "I know you're angry with me. I know you think terrible things, but I hope we can talk. Try to understand each other." Still nothing. Lenora sat in one of the chairs, arranging her skirts. Mrs. Patterson took a position near the window, notepad in hand. From the kitchen, Clara could feel Wade and Elena listening to every word. "Your father loved you so much," Lenora continued. "Did I ever tell you that? How much he talked about you in those last days? How he made me promise to take care of you. It was a lie." Clara's father had been delirious with fever, calling for his first wife, barely recognizing Clara when she sat beside him. He'd said nothing to Lenora about promises or care, but Clara couldn't prove that, and Lenora knew it. "He would be so sad to see us like this," Lenora said. "Separated, fighting. This isn't what he wanted." "Stop!" Clara's voice came out raw. "Stop pretending you care." "But I do care, sweetheart. I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But I never stopped." "You threw me out of the wagon," the words exploded from Clara. "You looked at me and said I was worthless and drove away while I begged you to stop." Mrs. Patterson's pen moved rapidly across her notepad. Lenora's eyes went cold for just a fraction of a second. Then the warmth returned. "You were so cold that day. Confused. I understand why you remember it wrong." "I don't remember it wrong. I remember every word you said, every second of watching you leave, every wolf that circled me in the dark." "Clara, please. I won't go back to you. Not in 90 days. Not ever. I'd rather run away. I'd rather—" Elena appeared in the doorway. "That's enough. Clara, come to the kitchen." "But the visit," Mrs. Patterson started, "can continue after Clara calms down, unless you want to put in your report that Mrs. Voss agitated the child into a panic attack." Mrs. Patterson's pen paused. She looked at Lenora, at Clara's shaking hands, at the situation deteriorating rapidly. Perhaps a short break would be wise. Clara fled to the kitchen. Wade caught her before she could collapse, his arms steady around her shoulders. She couldn't breathe right, couldn't stop shaking. "You're all right," Wade said quietly. "I've got you." The visit ended early. Mrs. Patterson noted the disruption in her report. Lenora left looking falsely sympathetic, but Clara had seen the flash of satisfaction. She was building a case. Look how disturbed the child is, how unstable, how poisoned against her natural guardian. The visits continued weekly, each one a fresh torture. Lenora played her part perfectly, the concerned stepmother trying to reconnect with a hostile child. Clara tried to stay calm, tried to be civil, but every second in Lenora's presence felt like drowning. Mrs. Patterson's reports grew more detailed. She noted Clara's anxiety, her refusal to engage, her obvious preference for the Holloways. But she also noted that Lenora remained patient, appropriate, attempting connection despite rejection. "She's winning," Clara said one night, 3 weeks into the 90 days, "making it look like I'm the problem." Wade and Elena sat across from her at the kitchen table. They'd been going over Mrs. Patterson's latest report, their faces grim. "She's trying," Elena corrected. "Doesn't mean she'll succeed." "But what if she does? What if at the end of 90 days the judge says I have to go back?" The question hung in the air, heavy with everything they'd been trying not to say. Finally, Wade spoke. "Then we find another way." "What way?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not letting her take you, Clara. That's a promise." It should have been comforting, but Clara heard the desperation underneath, the fear that promises might not be enough. Week 7 brought a change. Mrs. Patterson arrived for the visit without Lenora. Instead, she came with a thick folder and a serious expression. "The court has received additional information," she announced. "Information that may impact the custody decision." Wade and Elena exchanged glances. "What kind of information?" 3 members of the Fletcher wagon party have provided sworn statements. They remember Mrs. Voss and Clara traveling with them. They remember Mrs. Voss's treatment of the child. Mrs. Patterson opened the folder. One witness described seeing bruises on Clara's arms. Another reports hearing Mrs. Voss threaten to abandon Clara if she didn't work harder. The third states that Mrs. Voss explicitly told multiple people she regretted taking on her husband's child. The kitchen went silent. Why didn't they come forward earlier? Elena asked. They were in Oregon City. Took Morrison's investigators weeks to track them down and get formal statements. Mrs. Patterson looked at Clara. These testimonies corroborate your version of events. They establish a pattern of neglect and abuse. Hope flared in Clara's chest, bright and painful. What does this mean? Wade's voice was carefully controlled. It means the judge will review the case again, possibly ahead of the 90-day timeline. Mrs. Patterson closed the folder. I'll be recommending that visitation be suspended pending that review. Will he listen? Judge Blackwood takes child welfare seriously. If he believes Clara was genuinely endangered, he'll act. Mrs. Patterson stood. I can't make promises, but this is significant. She left, taking her folder and her cautious optimism with her. Clara didn't let herself believe it. Couldn't afford to hope too hard only to have it crushed again. But over the next week, something shifted. Lenora's scheduled visit was canceled. Then another. Court documents arrived. Dry legal language that Clara couldn't fully understand, but Wade read with increasing satisfaction. They're reopening the custody hearing, he announced one evening. New evidence, new testimonies, everything back on the table. When? 2 weeks. 2 weeks to wait. 2 weeks to prepare. 2 weeks of Lenora somewhere in Silver Creek, watching her case fall apart, getting desperate. The attack came on day 11. Clara was in the chicken coop, her safe place, her routine, when she heard horses approaching fast, multiple riders. She moved to the window and saw them, Victor, 2 men she didn't recognize, and a woman in official-looking clothes carrying papers. Wade met them in the yard, rifle in hand. Get off my property. We have a court order, the woman announced. She dismounted, holding papers. Emergency petition for immediate custody transfer signed by Judge Harlan in the territorial capital. Judge Blackwood's handling this case, Wade countered. Judge Blackwood's authority has been superseded. Judge Harlan has concerns about bias, given Mr. Morrison's involvement in your marriage and custody filing. The woman thrust the papers at Wade. Clara Whitmore is to be released to Mrs. Voss's custody immediately pending the new hearing. Like hell. The 2 men with Victor dismounted, both armed, both looking ready for trouble. Don't make this difficult, Mr. Holloway, Victor said smoothly. We're acting within the law. Resisting will only make things worse. Clara's world tilted. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after everything. Elena appeared from the house, her face pale. Thomas and Miguel came running from the barn. The ranch hands materialized from various corners of the property, all of them armed, all of them moving into defensive positions. The woman with the papers looked nervous. This doesn't need to be violent. Just release the child. Show me that order, Wade demanded. She handed it over. Wade scanned it, his jaw tightening with each line. This is backdated, signed 3 days ago, but just being served now? That's not protocol. The timing isn't your concern. It's fraud. Wade threw the papers back at her. Hale probably bribed some judge in the Capitol, got him to sign papers that don't legally supersede Blackwood's jurisdiction, and you're either incompetent enough to believe it or corrupt enough not to care which. The woman's face flushed. I'm an officer of the court executing a legal order. You're a pawn in a rich man's game. Now get off my land before this gets ugly. Victor's smile was sharp. There are 3 of us, Mr. Holloway, plus Mrs. Voss waiting in town with the territorial marshal. You're outnumbered and outmaneuvered. I count 6 men on my side, all armed, all loyal. How many do you really want to die over fake paperwork? The standoff stretched. Guns stayed holstered, but hands hovered near them. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then Clara made her decision. She stepped out of the chicken coop and walked toward the group in the yard. Elena saw her and called out, Clara, no! Get back inside! But Clara kept walking, kept moving until she stood beside Wade, her small frame dwarfed by the armed adults, but her voice clear. I'm not going with you. Victor looked down at her, his expression mixing pity and calculation. Clara, sweetheart, you don't have a choice. I do. I'm choosing to stay here with people who want me alive. Mrs. Voss wants you alive. She's been fighting for you. She's been fighting for control. There's a difference. Clara looked at the woman with the papers. I don't know if that order is real or fake, but I know what happens if I leave this ranch. Lenora will hurt me again. Maybe not right away, but eventually. And next time, nobody will find me in time. You're being dramatic. What is it? I'm being honest. Claire's voice shook but didn't break. I'd rather die fighting to stay here than live one more day as her property. The words landed like stones. The woman looked uncomfortable. One of Victor's hired men shifted his weight, clearly not signed up for threatening children. Wade's hand settled on Claire's shoulder. You heard her. She's not going. This isn't legal, Victor started. Neither is kidnapping, which is what you'll be doing if you try to take a child against her will on questionable authority. Wade's voice went hard. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back on your horses. You're going to ride back to Silver Creek. You're going to tell whoever sent you that Iron Ridge Ranch doesn't recognize fraudulent court orders. And if you want Clara, you'll go through proper channels with proper documentation reviewed by the actual judge assigned to this case. Mrs. Voss won't accept this, Victor warned. Mrs. Voss doesn't get a vote. Now leave before my patience runs out. The woman with the papers looked at the armed ranch hands, at Clara's determined face, at the whole situation spiraling beyond her control. I'll report this defiance to the authorities. You do that. They left slowly, maintaining dignity even in retreat, but Clara saw the anger in Victor's eyes. The calculation. This wasn't over. That night, Wade called a meeting of all the ranch hands in the barn. Things are going to get worse before they get better, he told them. Hale's got resources and connections. He's going to keep pushing, keep finding angles. Anyone wants to leave before this turns into a war, I understand. No judgment. Nobody moved. Thomas spoke up. We're staying, all of us. This could mean legal trouble for you, charges of aiding and abetting if things go wrong. Don't care. Miguel's voice was firm. Clara's one of ours now. We don't abandon our own. A murmur of agreement ran through the group. Clara, watching from the barn door with Elena, felt her throat tighten. All right then. Wade's expression softened slightly. Double watches. Nobody in or out without verification. And everyone stays armed. If Hale tries another stunt like today, I want to be ready. The ranch became a fortress. The hearing was rescheduled for 4 days later, fast-tracked, because of the conflicting court orders and the escalating situation. Judge Blackwood made it clear in his summons that he was not pleased with the attempted end run around his authority. When they arrived at the courthouse, the atmosphere was different, tense. Federal marshals stood outside, ensuring no violence. The gallery was packed. Ranchers, townspeople, even a few newspaper reporters from the territorial capital. Lenora sat at her table looking diminished, her performance finally cracking under pressure. Victor whispered urgently in her ear, but she barely responded. Judge Blackwood entered, and the room fell silent. Before we begin, he said, his voice cutting, I want to address the attempted custody transfer from 2 days ago. The order presented was reviewed by myself and 2 other territorial judges. It was improperly executed, exceeded the issuing judge's jurisdiction, and appears to have been obtained through misrepresentation of facts. Victor stood. Your Honor, I object to the characterization. Sit down, Mr. Hale. I'm not finished. Blackwood's glare could have melted steel. Furthermore, Judge Harlan has been censured for signing documents without proper review. Any future attempts to circumvent this court's authority will result in contempt charges. Am I clear? Yes, Your Honor. Good. Now let's address the actual matter at hand. Blackwood reviewed his notes. I've received sworn testimonies from members of the Fletcher Wagon Party. All 3 witnesses corroborate Clara's account of abuse and mistreatment. Additionally, I've reviewed Mrs. Patterson's visitation reports, which note significant anxiety and distress in the child whenever Mrs. Voss is present. He looked at Lenora. Mrs. Voss, stand. She did, her legs shaking. Your testimony at the previous hearing painted a picture of tragic misunderstanding. But these new testimonies tell a different story, a story of deliberate cruelty, of a woman who viewed her stepdaughter as a burden and acted accordingly. Blackwood's voice was steel. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Lenora's mouth opened and closed. Victor stood quickly. Your Honor, my client maintains, I asked Mrs. Voss, not you. Silence stretched. Lenora looked at Clara across the courtroom, and whatever she saw there, maybe defiance, maybe strength, Maybe just a child who refused to break, made something in her snap. She was never supposed to be mine, Lenora said, her voice flat. Her father dumped her on me, expected me to love a child that wasn't mine, to sacrifice everything for someone else's mistake. I did my duty. I kept her fed and clothed, but when he died and left me with nothing but debts and a useless girl, she stopped, seeming to realize she'd said too much. But it was enough. The courtroom erupted. Blackwood's gavel cracked repeatedly. Order! I will have order! When silence finally fell, Blackwood looked at Lenora with something like disgust. In my 30 years on the bench, I've seen many kinds of cruelty, but abandoning a child to die ranks among the worst. He shuffled papers. Based on the evidence presented, the testimony of multiple witnesses, and your own admission just now, I'm terminating all parental and guardianship rights of Lenora Voss regarding Clara Whitmore, effective immediately. Lenora made a sound like a sob, but Clara saw relief in her eyes. She'd never wanted Clara. This just made it official. Furthermore, Blackwood continued, I'm granting full legal custody to Wade and Elena Holloway. Their marriage, regardless of its origins, has provided Clara with stability and safety. The court recognizes their guardianship as permanent. The gavel came down with finality. It was over. Clara felt Elena's arms come around her, felt Wade's hand on her head, felt the weight of months of fear finally lifting. Around them, the courtroom buzzed with reactions. Shock, satisfaction, outrage from Lenora's supporters. But Clara barely heard any of it. She was safe. Actually, legally, permanently safe. Victor was arguing with Blackwood about appeals, about jurisdiction, about anything that might salvage the situation. But the judge shut him down with icy precision. The ruling stood. Lenora left the courtroom without looking back. She'd played her part, lost her gamble, and now she was free to continue her life without the burden she'd never wanted. Victor followed, already calculating his next con, his next mark. Clara would never see either of them again. The ride back to Iron Ridge Ranch was different than the previous trip. No tension, no fear, just exhausted relief. Is it really over? Clara asked. Wade glanced back from the driver's seat. It's really over? She can't come back? Can't try again? Her rights are terminated. Legally, she's nothing to you, a stranger. Elena squeezed Clara's hand. You're ours now. Actually ours. The word settled into Clara's chest, warm and solid and real. At the ranch, the hands were waiting. When they saw the faces in the wagon, they knew. Cheers went up. Thomas actually smiled. Miguel swept Clara into a hug that lifted her off her feet. Told you we'd win, he said, grinning. We didn't win. The law won. Justice won. Whatever you want to call it, we got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought. We all fought. And sometimes that's enough. That night, Elena made a feast. The kitchen filled with food, laughter, stories. The ranch hands stayed late, celebrating not just the legal victory, but the fact that their strange little family had survived intact. Clara sat at the table watching Wade and Elena move around each other with practiced ease. Their marriage had started as strategy, but somewhere along the way it had become real. Not romance novel real, but real in the way that mattered. Partnership, respect, shared purpose. Months passed into years. Clara grew up at Iron Ridge Ranch, learning to ride and rope and shoot. Learning to read law books with Morrison, who became a mentor despite his drinking. Learning to cook from Elena, though she never quite mastered bread the way Elena could. Wade taught her about cattle and land management, about building things that lasted, about how the strongest structures weren't always the ones that looked perfect. Sometimes strength came from knowing where to bend so you didn't break. On her 15th birthday, Wade officially adopted her. Clara Whitmore became Clara Holloway in a simple courthouse ceremony that meant more than all the grand gestures in the world. By 18, she was running parts of the ranch herself. By 20, she'd expanded it, buying adjacent land and building infrastructure. By 25, Iron Ridge Ranch was one of the most successful operations in Montana Territory, and Clara was known throughout the region as a force to be reckoned with. She never forgot where she came from, never forgot the cold or the wolves or the woman who threw her away. But she also never let those memories define her. Instead, she let them sharpen her. She became someone who protected the abandoned, who took in the unwanted, who built a legacy not on blood or birth, but on the revolutionary idea that family was something you chose, something you fought for, something you built with your own hands. Iron Ridge Ranch became known as a place where broken people could heal, where children with nowhere else to go found safety, where the world's discards discovered they were worth something after all. Wade and Elena ran it together until they were old and gray, their strategic marriage having lasted longer and better than most love matches. They never had children of their own, but they raised dozens through Clara's efforts. When Wade died, peacefully in his sleep at 73, half the territory came to his funeral. The eulogy talked about his business acumen and his cattle breeding and his contributions to Montana's development. But Clara's private goodbye was simpler. "You saved me when you didn't have to. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." Elena lived another 5 years, sharp and fierce until the end. On her last day, with Clara holding her hand, she smiled. "We did good, didn't we?" "You did great." "No, we, all of us together." Elena's grip tightened. "You were worth every fight, Clara, every single one." She died that night, and Clara buried her next to Wade on the hill overlooking the ranch they'd built. Years later, when Clara was old herself and training the next generation to run Iron Ridge, someone asked her the secret to the ranch's success. She thought about it. Thought about that 10-year-old girl freezing in the snow. About the rancher who could have ridden past. About the housekeeper who agreed to a crazy marriage. About all the broken pieces that had somehow fitted together into something that worked. "The secret," she said finally, "is remembering that everyone's worth saving, even when the world says otherwise, especially then. Because sometimes the people society throws away become the ones who build the future. Sometimes the unwanted become the essential. Sometimes the broken pieces make the strongest foundation. Not because trauma is beautiful or suffering builds character or any of that nonsense people tell themselves to make sense of cruelty, but because people who've survived the impossible know exactly how valuable survival is. Know how much it costs. Know what it's worth. And they'll fight like hell to make sure nobody else has to die alone in the snow." That was the lesson Clara learned in the winter of 1871. That was the legacy she built at Iron Ridge Ranch. That was the story she lived, long and well, surrounded by the family she chose and the life she'd fought to claim. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, and lasting, and hers. And in the end, that was enough.